Welcome everyone to the September 21st, 2016 meeting of the Department of Toxic Substances Independent Review Panel. It's a pleasure to be here in the Commerce City Hall. We have an agenda in front of us. The panel has been on a two-day tour of meetings throughout Southern California. We started last night in Chatsworth, out in the northwest San Fernando Valley. This morning we had a meeting in Jurupa Valley out in Riverside County, just a little bit east of the 15 freeway on the 60, and now here at Commerce City Hall. So we have an agenda before us. We're going to go through that agenda, but first wanted to do some brief introductions, and then we'll salute the flag. My name is Gideon Krakow. I'm an environmental lawyer from here in Los Angeles. I serve as the chair of the Department of Toxic Substances Control Independent Review Panel, the appointee of the Senate Rules Committee to the public member seat, and we'll do a few more introductions. Mr. Vice Chair?
My name is Mike Vizier. I was appointed by the governor as a local government expert on this panel. I retired in April of 2015. Before that, as the manager of the San Diego County Certified Unified Program Agency, which does a significant amount of environmental enforcement. I worked with DTSC closely for, well, really 20 years in a variety of other state agencies. I work very closely with the LA County CUPA, the LA City CUPA, the City of Santa Fe Springs CUPA, the Long Beach CUPA, the Torrance CUPA, and I'm forgetting, of course, Vernon. We had a great advantage in San Diego County that we just had one CUPA. The coordination amongst those and the number of agencies in LA County, 83 cities, I believe, makes it very complicated. I used to tell people, San Diego County is about the size of Connecticut in population and land mass. The population in LA County, I think, is bigger than all but 8 states, one of which is California. LA is such a huge, complicated group of things that it continually amazes me, but I'd like to think that I still know everybody and I'm willing to listen and can work with you and help this panel out here. But really pleased to be in Los Angeles and really proud of the work you do from all different aspects.
Dr. Campbell?
Good evening. My name is Arzu Campbell. I'm an associate professor at Western University of Health Sciences. I'm the member with scientific expertise, and I was appointed by the Speaker of the Assembly.
We're served by a counsel tonight. Counsel, if you want to introduce yourself very briefly.
Hello, everyone. My name is Helen Ahrens. I'm with the Attorney General's Office, and I'll be counsel to the panel this evening.
Thank you, counsel. We have 2 staff members for our independent review panel. If you'll briefly introduce yourselves.
Hi, my name is Larry Rolfus. I'm the IRP's program analyst.
Good evening. My name is Mike Singh, and I'm office technician for IRP. Thank you.
So now that you know a little bit about the folks up here, just to set the tone for their meeting, if we can, please rise and salute the flag.
Ready? Pledge allegiance.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here in the City of Commerce. We want to thank the folks here at City Hall for being such terrific hosts for us. So many community meetings have been held in this room. Had the opportunity to be on the other side of this dais many, many times. Think of all the places in the world that I never thought I would sit. It would be up here. So that's a little bit strange. But here we are in the City of Commerce, and we do appreciate it. What we want to do at this time is to take the opportunity to explain a little bit about this panel, why we're here tonight, what the legislature and the governor have asked this panel to do, Fundamentally, as the agenda indicates, the purpose of this meeting is to learn from and listen to communities to assist our review of the Department of Toxic Substances Controls programs and consideration of recommendations to improve those programs, especially the Department's public outreach and public participation activities. So primarily, above all, we are here to listen today. We did have some action items, but those were handled in our Harupa Valley meeting today. So this meeting essentially is going to be all about public comment, all about listening to how you feel the department is performing on the ground. But to set the framework and lay the foundation for that, we'll just briefly turn it over to Larry, who's going to give a quick presentation on the panel and our role.
Thank you. Just what is the Independent Review Panel? Well, it was created last year by Senate Bill 83. The bill was signed into law last June, in which, as a budget bill, it went into effect immediately. And Senate Bill 83 added a section to the Health and Safety Code, Section 57014. So SB 83, or this new Health and Safety Code section, created a panel consisting of 3 members to review and make recommendations regarding improvements to the department's permitting, enforcement, public outreach, and fiscal management. As called for in the statute, the panel consists of 3 members. They've already introduced themselves to you. One is required to be an appointee of the Assembly Speaker with scientific experience related to toxic materials. The other panel member is an appointee of the Senate Committee on Rules, who is a community representative. And the third panel member must be an appointee of the governor, who is a local government management expert. The individuals, as you know, who are appointed to be on the panel are Dr. Arizu Campbell, Mr. Gideon Krakoff, and Mr. Mike Vizier. I'll talk a little bit about the IRP website in a couple minutes, but here's the page with photos of panel members. With the exception of Dr. Campbell, they show how they looked 10 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. That was the only one I could find with a tie on.
But you can click on their names and get more background information about them, as well as contact information for each of them. The last panel member was appointed on October 31st of 2015, and that started the clock on progress reports that SB 83 requires the panel to submit every 90 days. So what does the panel do? Well, according to SB 83, it can advise DTSC on issues related to the department's reporting obligations. It shall make recommendations for improving DTSC's programs, and it shall advise DTSC on compliance with Health and Safety Code Section 57007. And this code section requires Cal EPA and the entities within that agency to institute quality government programs to achieve increased levels of environmental protection and the public satisfaction. The code section requires DTSC and those other agencies to report every 2 years to the governor and the legislature on the extent to which they have achieved their performance objectives and on their quality improvement efforts. The code section also defines what a quality government program is. Basically, a process for obtaining the views of various stakeholders with regard to performance vision and the needs of the agency implementing the quality government program. Also a process for developing measurable performance objectives, And finally, processes for continually improving the quality and for training agency personnel, using information gained from the first two endeavors. SB 83 requires the panel to submit reports to the governor and the legislature every 90 days on the department's progress in reducing permitting and enforcement backlogs, improving public outreach, and thirdly, improving fiscal management. And we often just refer to these reports as 90-day progress reports or progress reports. SB 83 also requires the panel to submit recommendations to the governor and the legislature at the time of each submission of the governor's budget to the legislature, which must take place by January 10th of every year. And the panel often refers to those reports as annual reports. And those are the reports that must have recommendations in them. SB 83 remains in effect until January 1st of 2018, which means that the panel goes out of existence on that date unless some future law extends its existence or deletes the sunset date. You can see on this slide the report deadlines, both the annual reports and the progress reports. The check marks indicate reports that have been submitted, and the next one that is due is on October 24th. The panel has been holding at least one public meeting every month since November, its first meeting of last year. The majority of the panel's meetings are in Sacramento, but by the end of this week, the panel will have had 5 meetings outside of Sacramento, all of them in Southern California. Earlier this year, the panel put together a work plan that runs through this year and all of next year, and it basically devotes 2 or 3 months to each of the 4 topics specifically called out in the legislation, plus 2 other topics that the panel concluded also are critical. And those topics are site mitigation and DTSC's source reduction and consumer products programs. SB 83 gives the panel the discretion to make recommendations on other topics beyond the 4 topics that are called out in the legislation. So you can see here we're in September of 2006, and the panel now is concentrating, as you can see on the right, on public outreach. The next report will be devoted primarily to public outreach, and you'll probably notice today that panel members' ears will perk up, especially if in our comments we mention public outreach issues. And the very first report was devoted, though, to initial recommendations for several DTSC programs. What's in a typical IRP report? Well, 4 things usually. One is a description of whatever DTSC program is being reviewed. Also, the panel often makes information requests of the department in its reports. It might want more information on something for consideration at a future meeting, and it'll put that in the report. Thirdly, reports have recommendations for the governor and the legislature. You know, this is really the main reason for the panel's existence, is to make recommendations like that. And 2 kinds, you know, some recommendations are appropriate for the governor and legislature, others are appropriate for DTSC. And finally, a typical report will recommend some performance metrics for the department, future goals, that sort of thing for the department. The IRP, as I mentioned earlier, has a website. The website address is at the top of this slide. Probably an easier way to get there is just to go to the DTSC website and click on the government tab and then scroll down to independent review panel. The website is a great way to catch up on the work of the IRP to date. I'll just go over really quickly some of the website pages. Of course, it has a home page with the basic mission of the panel. You've already seen the page with the panel member information. There's a page for IRP governance documents, such as the work plan that I mentioned earlier. There's also a document on panel procedures, meeting procedures, and so forth. There's a page for meeting agendas and notices, a page for public meetings, and for each public meeting, posted there will be all of the documents that were submitted for that meeting. And there's a record of all the past meetings too. So you can access, all of the documents that have been submitted at meetings or for meetings. Approved minutes of meetings are there on a page. And there's also a page for called supporting materials. And this page has some, I think, important background documents and materials that the IRP reviewed. I just think it's a great source of all kinds of information on the DTSC. It's divided up by topics, usually programs, enforcement, permitting, and so on and so forth. The website also has a page for IRP correspondence, written by the panel on its letterhead. Another page for documents and communications submitted by the public. If a member of the public submits a communication to the panel, expect it to be posted on this page. There's also a page for meeting webcasts. The panel usually webcasts its meetings, not always, sometimes it's not technically possible. This meeting today is not being webcasted, but you can access all past webcasts, if there is one, from this page and go through entire meetings, everything that happened during the course of the meeting. And finally, there is a page for IRP reports, and these are the progress reports and the annual reports that were submitted to the governor and the legislature are posted there. You can join the IRP's e-list from this page as well. Just click on the e-list link from the website on the left-hand side to subscribe to updates on panel activities, usually only 2 or 3 updates a month. We don't overload you. And it's very easy to unsubscribe if you decide that you don't want to receive them anymore. Language barriers. All of our agendas are translated into Spanish. You'll see a Spanish translation of our agenda back there. And the panel offers spontaneous translation to Spanish available at meetings by advance request. And this particular meeting, spontaneous translation is being offered. We have 2 individuals here to help with that, and devices at the back of the room to pick for translation during the course of the meeting. You can also participate in panel meetings from a remote location. Not everybody can travel to Sacramento for IRP meetings. And so the meetings that are webcasted, you can go to. It's at a different web page from the DTSC's site. You go to it's a web page on the Cal EPA's website, and the email address is on the screen to do that during the course of a meeting. And the members of the public can also submit submit public comments by email during the course of a meeting, and time permitting and all of that, your comments will be, I apologize for this,
That's just me calling you.
time permitting, your comments will be read. The panel also has two support staff members, myself and Mike. Here's our contact information. There also is a liaison. DTSC has a liaison to the panel that we go through to, request information and so forth for the panel of DTSC. That position is currently vacant. The individual who had the position was recently promoted, and in a short, it'll eventually be filled. So anyway, in conclusion, I'd just like to emphasize that the IRP truly is independent of the DTSC, as its name suggests. An example of that is when support staff works on an IRP report, we don't run the drafts by the DTSC first before posting the report on the website and getting it to the full panel. There's a separation there, and we do that to preserve the independence, the true independence of the panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Larry. There's going to be a test on all of that at the end here, so I want to make sure everyone is listening carefully. Thank you. We have an agenda in front of us. We're going to move through that agenda. We're now to announcements. Just very briefly, the restrooms. The restrooms are out the door, turn right, and then they're on the left before the sliding doors at the library. There is a general comment period, agenda item 6, for the public. And if we have other agenda items, which I don't believe we do, there'll be public comment for that too. If you wish to make a comment card on any of these agenda items, please fill out the comment card. These can be found at the back of the room. Once you fill them out, please give them to Mike Singh. Mike, please raise your hand, and we will get those comments and provide you with the opportunity to speak, and we'll certainly be listening. We also have the Spanish translation here tonight, so if anyone does need Spanish translation, that is available. I would ask one of the translators to please thank you for being here, and also if you can please just say out loud that you're available for translation if anyone needs that. So thank you very much. Looking at the agenda, colleagues, we're now in item 4 here, which is the agenda review. We have already talked about postponing, actually we've handled all of the business and action items that we needed to. You never know, there might be some things that pop up at the end of the meeting, but I think right now we can dispense with most of those and push anything that's needed to the end of the meeting after we take up item 6. We've already handled item 5. We don't need to do that. We've handled item 7 and item 8. We will postpone item 9 and 10 to the end of the meeting if necessary. Item 11 we've already handled as well, but we'll give a meeting on that, a notice on that. And there is a no closed session. So is there any objection to proceeding that way?
No objection.
Okay, so we're going to go right in now to item number 4, which is general public comment. The 6, rather, general public comment, which is the purpose of the meeting. Indicated that this is the time in the panel's activities where we're looking into public outreach and public participation. On the agenda, it indicates that the IRP typically limits public comments to 5 minutes per individual. There is some discretion with that. We'd ask if anyone wanted to make a much longer presentation that they contact the panel staff by September 14th for PowerPoints or things like that. But my understanding is we have not received any requests for overtime presentations. Is that correct?
That's my understanding.
So we're typically going to go for about 5 minutes, again, with some discretion. But the whole purpose for this meeting is to listen, to give folks the opportunity to speak their minds and to learn from what they have to say. There's so many people in the room, tonight that have worked so hard on these issues for so many years. And we have also a lot of representations from the DTSC and also folks representing the local elected officials. So want to acknowledge some of those folks, and probably there'll be some that are missed. But we have Mark Lopez from East Yard Communities right down the street. We want to thank you, Mark, for all the work that you're doing and for helping us set up this meeting. Thank you very much. I see Jane Williams and Cynthia Babich up there as well. We really appreciate the participation. We also have from the department, many of the department's leadership. It's a little bit hard to see, but I believe we have Ana Mascareñas. If you want to stand up and introduce yourself briefly, Ana. And many of you know Ana already, and there's other representatives from the department here. I think I see Mr. Pang, if you want to introduce yourself briefly. And I don't know if Chief Deputy Director Negri is in the room at this moment. We also have the brand new Deputy Director for Site Mitigation, Mr. Nazimi, if you want to introduce yourself. And Mr. Nazemi just started, I believe, on Monday to that very important position. So I know the department's very pleased to have you. And although this panel is supposed to be independent and reviewing the department and being tough and all those things like we are, I want to emphasize to, and I see Mr. Campos there as well, part of the public participation program, we want to emphasize that for this department to succeed, you need to succeed. And our goal as panelists and everyone in this room is to see you succeed, to see you individually and as a department be the best that you can be. So a lot of stakeholders and a lot of folks interested in public protection, and we all understand the important role that you have and realize that it's in all of our interests to see you all be the best that you can be. And so we're all on that consistent mission and unified throughout the room on that. We also have the presence of a lot of really experienced, dedicated public servants from the different local elected offices here. We have with us, and I'm not sure who wants to make a statement, but we would like to take that opportunity now to give some time. There has to be an order to these things, but each of the elected officials representatives are certainly equally important. But we will start to acknowledge Marie Liu, who is one of the main policy deputies for the Speaker of the Assembly, Anthony Rendon. Marie, are you here in the room? And did you want to make a brief statement? Please.
Good evening. Again, my name is Marie Liu. I'm here on behalf of Assemblymember Anthony Rendon. And we want to, first of all, thank the IRP for the critical and thoughtful questions in the review of DTSC that you've been doing so far. The deep dive that you've been doing on the department is sorely needed, and the legislature has been looking at your recommendations very seriously, your recommendations and findings. We also want to thank you for coming coming down to listen to communities directly, the communities who have been very deeply affected by toxics. It's important that we hear their voice, because hearing from the public is the key to understanding how the state is best able to serve them. Ultimately, we see that DTSC has an essential role to play as a public health agency, and we need to figure out how to reform the department so that we can get them to that goal, and then we can start protecting our communities in a real way. So thank you very much, and I look forward to listening to the public comments as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Liu. We look forward to working with you. We are here in Commerce, and we have the representatives from Commerce in the State Senate and the State Assembly. We have Jonathan Flores here from Senator Ricardo Lara's office. Mr. Flores. Hi, welcome. We also have Amanda Metza from Assembly Member Cristina Garcia's office. Thank you very much. And we also are blessed to have a real leader here from Southern California, and also certainly in the API community from another great leader. We have Daisy Ma here, the district director from Ed Chow's office, Assemblymember Ed Chow. Thank you, Daisy. So we are now in the general public comment period. The IRP will hear general public comment on issues within the panel's purview. We want to, again, ask anyone who wishes to comment, and we do want to hear from folks. Please fill out one of these comment cards in the back of the room and give them to Mr. Singh, and we will go forward with all of those comments at approximately 5 minutes per speaker. We're going to start with another great civic leader here who's done so much for the community and been a mentor to so many people, Father John Moretta from Resurrection Church. Father John, there you are. Probably should have had you give us a blessing. Maybe it's not too late.
Good evening. I just want to briefly say that a couple of things that have been there's many things in the community at these. I'm part of the advisory committee that meets regularly, and we brought up different things over the time that we've been meeting. One of the things that's in my craw right now, and I have a chance to tell you guys, is that the easement, the part of the parkway, from the very beginning, the decision was made by somebody on high from the DTSC that they were not going to clean up the parkway. That's a piece of property from the sidewalk to the street. And some of those places, it's narrow. It's maybe not even 4 feet wide. Some of it's wider. It's maybe 8 feet wide or 10 feet wide, depending upon the neighborhood. But it doesn't make much sense if you're spending all this money to clean up the house, to clean up the grounds, all the dirt and removal, and then you leave the parkway. You've got to go into the house. You park your car. You go through that dirt, and you see the inconsistency there. So we brought it up. I don't know how many times, and I'm always told they're discussing it. They're discussing it. So I don't know what legal means that we have. I don't know what, but it just seems like a real stupid thing to omit cleaning up the parkway. The first person that his house was cleaned up, I noticed it right away, and I said to the guy, I said, how come they didn't clean up outside? He said, oh, they told me that wasn't my property. Well, I don't care who owns the property. It should be cleaned up. So that's one thing. Another thing is the county tried to show the agent at the time was the engineering company from Pasadena. They were trying to start the cleanup of the houses, not the houses, the soil testing. And when they went in, they showed a difference. The county brought a process where they were using 2 burners where they dry the dirt and then they sift it. They were using 2 of those, and you go to the other place, Jacobs Engineering, I believe is the name, where they were using just 1 burner. Obviously, they were cutting down the time that they were able to do the cleanup, just another cleanup, testing of the soil. So I've just mentioned, I don't know how many times. I talked to somebody as of just this week, and of the new company they've hired, and I asked them, how many burners are you using? The young man said to me, because they were coming to our property, the church property. They've already done the school, but they're not coming to the church. And they said, well, we're using just 1 burner. It's like $50. What is the big deal? Why can't they have 2 burners to dry the dirt? And if they need 2 sifters, use 2 sifters. But whatever it is, it could facilitate and make a process that's going to take years before we clean up the neighborhood much faster. And those 2 things come to my mind immediately. And I think that the agency is making a great strides in trying to educate the community. I think they've listened to us many times, but I think that they're always, if this is an opportunity to give a critique, I just did it. Thank you.
Thank you, Father John. Could we ask you a couple questions, you think? There's many people in the audience, and we forgot to mention Ms. Zoe Baer, who's running the Exide project. If you want to stand up and wave there in the back, and she's listening to you, Father John. So we know you've been involved in the Exide matter almost since the beginning.
I was born in Vernon, I think. I was born there, actually.
Were you? So the panel was trying to understand how the department's functioning with regard to Exide, and perhaps learn what strengths it's been exhibiting and what needs there are. Can you give us your sense as to how the department is functioning with Exide, and maybe some big picture ideas for us to consider?
Well, I just, my last thought was a compliment to them. I think that we have access to it's not that they're not hearing these things. It's just that there isn't the action to it, you know. We have an advisor to our group, and we've mentioned these things to them. They have access to the leadership of the DTSC. But just a small thing like that, they still, as of now, I don't think now, maybe Zoe can tell us they've changed the policy, because they've been telling me they've been changing it. But from what I can see, I haven't seen them, as of now, clean up somebody's parkway. And it is a big issue. And but again, I don't want to beat down the efforts that they're doing, because it's a very, very important thing. They must work. We must work with them. And obviously they're working with us. So I don't have any other big-ticket items to mention to you, except I think that we just want to get it done, and done expeditiously. And especially in the interior of the homes, I don't know what their protocol is right now. I don't know what they finally decided upon. I know that just to give them a coupon is not sufficient. They were giving them a coupon and say, you can go down to such and such a company, and we'll pay for the cleanup. And they'll just do a lick and a promise inside there. We know that inside of those homes it can be even more filthy or more contaminated than the outside of the homes. And again, these are things that we don't have much other resources except you people now with this new committee, this review panel. You have the juice now to do something about this, and hopefully that's just a simple thing, but it is, to me, it can be overcome very easily.
How about the department's communication and public outreach? Any observations on that?
Well, I can tell you that it's been more than once that they change the location of a meeting, or they'll change at the last minute, and it's very difficult if they make these changes, these cancellations, and then you don't get the right place. And or people just, we had meetings just now with the school parents from the Lorena Street School, and it was in the newspaper. Tony Barbosa from the Times made an investigation of it, and he cited some statistics about what the percentage of the contamination was at the local school. And really, I don't see where they just picked on that one, because the contamination is in the general base, in the general area there. But so they had a meeting, but they had the meeting at another school, another site, instead of they were supposed to go back to the now maybe they did this now, because they're the local public school, I don't know, but from what I understood, they didn't have a meeting particularly addressed to the parents of that particular school. They had to go to another school, and they were given a last-minute notice of this, too. The idea was that they were to go back the school night, and they were supposed to talk to the parents and all the above. Now, I may be wrong. Maybe they did have that meeting. Maybe Zoe or somebody can correct me on that, but that is a very important thing, the communication to the school parents. I mean, it was in the headlines of the Times for a couple of days, and the parents want to know. They want to know, are their children having a problem, or what is the difficulty? And you know, something that I shared with one of the workers of the DTSC, they brought up to me, and I thought of this months ago, was that our homes now are covered with dirt, all the homes, because all the grass is dead, the plants are dead, and the lead that's on the surface there, whatever lead is in there, you can just imagine that the children are even more vulnerable now. They were protected at least by the grass. They could at least, the grass was kind of a buffer. And now we have this, you look around, and all the 90% of the homes are all just dirt filled, and that dirt is raising up there. And the ones that are most vulnerable are the ones that play in the grass, play in the dirt, and I think it makes them more vulnerable. So it's a big problem.
Anything further for Father John? Thank you for coming.
All right, thank you, sir.
Next, Cynthia Babbage from Del Amo Action Committee.
Hey, not watching you on a little screen today. Much better. So I just wanted to give you some of my insights on public participation from my 23 years of experience working in my community. I think that there have been changes that have been made in the recent future or the recent past that are making a big difference by hiring basically, people from our own communities to work with us. And I think that is making a big difference. I do want to say that even though that's happening, I wonder how the authority is shared, let's say, because I think that what I see is depending on the person, the public participation specialist, and the way they do things, you can have different outcomes. And I would like to see a way where there could be more of an even playing field, where just because you have the good public participation person that goes above and beyond, you have a much more robust process, much more rewarding, and probably a lot more community participation, because communities can really feel if somebody really cares about their issue or not, if they're just there to check a box on a form saying that they went out and talked with the community. And then I've had the opportunity to work with folks like Florence Caribbean in the Maywood community, where it was robust. It was what the community asked for is what we tried to provide, not tell them what they needed, but really say that we're here to help you get what you need. And I think that on that level, with the drinking water issues in Maywood, it was a great success. And as I said, I think the new people coming in are really great, but I'm wondering if that new creativity and that new linkage with what EJ really is and what it means isn't being somewhat stifled by the people who are above them. And I'm not saying there's not great people there. I don't have a lot of participation in my community. My most recent participation was with the ECI property that I talked to you about in the voluntary cleanup program. And when I inquired to this person, the response I got was like, hey, we sent out a flyer. We already had the meeting, and at that meeting we decided there wasn't going to be any more public process because people didn't want it. And that was very put-offish, and I could realize how someone who wasn't me and a little more pushy would just be like, oh, okay, sorry, I missed my window of opportunity. And that's not what I really want to see. I want to see engagement with communities. I want to see people who are really asked to vet out what their needs are on a bigger scale, and not so much as this is my department, this is only what I can work with at the time. And to point to that, I was contacted by one of the near homeowners of this particular ECI property who has now had their property undermined and their walls are cracking and their foundation has cracked. And the inspector has been out there, and the whole time they've been complaining to the company, which was under DTSC oversight and later transferred to EPA, that this was happening and was basically told, don't worry about it, we have it under control. Well, not really, because now her insurance company is saying you don't have any coverage for this, and the agencies have pretty much told her it's a civil matter. I am working with the agencies. I've spoke to Anna this evening and passed over some paperwork, but I think if there was more of an oversight, then these kind of things couldn't slip through the cracks, where there's a project manager who's been given a voluntary cleanup assignment, which maybe they don't think is as important as a remediation, and they just kind of go about it at the way that suits them. And this is a really big problem. So perhaps an oversight panel or some kind of process where if the communities are not satisfied, they know who they can go to. They're not going and making a complaint to the same person that usually they're complaining about, which maybe won't go anywhere. So on the up note, I think things are looking better. I like the new faces that I see from our communities. We have trust and faith in them. But on the other hand, I do worry that enough of the problem that has been there historically has not been alleviated from this agency. And I think that would be really helpful. So if you could just, handle that, that would be great.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Babbage at this time? No. How would you characterize the relationship between the public participation specialists and the project managers?
I'm not sure there
Depends on each side, or?
I'm not sure that there is one. I will say from one of our experiences, we handed over one of our very wonderful Maywood Jules, an EJ, very well educated female who went to go work for the public participation department at DTSC and had to resign because of the conflicts within. So I think in that case it wouldn't be so good. I know that we have monthly meetings at Union Station, and the sites that are important to the members that come, in the past we have had project managers who came and did the report back, and that was very helpful, and that seems to somewhat waned off a little bit.
How about the public participation manual? My understanding is that the department, used to have this real big, thick manual. Not sure how effective that was because it was so voluminous. Right now, there is no updated manual. What do you think can be the role of that manual, and have you had experience working with it?
I have not had experience working with their manual. I have had experience working with other agencies like the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry and the US EPA. And I think that guidance documents are very important, and if you have a good one, now of course if you have a bad one they wouldn't be so important, but good ones are important, and they do create a resource for project managers to be able to go and look for themselves. If they have questions, I'm sure they could go to their superiors on that. But I like to see, if as a community person, that's one of the few things that I want to look at. I want to see what they're supposed to do, how they're supposed to do it. And I know you might find this shocking, but quite often you might find me out in my neighborhood with a video camera and whatever it is, a work plan, a guidance document, and I'm following it and I'm waving if it's not being followed. So I think it is important to institutionalize those things. Maybe you could streamline them a little bit. To be honest with you, it's a lot of really no-brainer situations. It's being compassionate, it's human nature, it's being honest. If it needs to be written down, well, so be it if people aren't following it. But I do think some kind of across-the-board guidance is important in the form of either a document or in form of leadership.
Thank y'all for joining us here in Commerce. It's good to have you here in our communities because we don't necessarily have budget to always come up to Sacramento or to go out to other areas, right? So I definitely appreciate that the IRP is looking at traveling into multiple communities, and so I definitely hope this isn't the last time y'all come here, because sometimes that's part of the problem that we see is there's no consistency, right? I think that's definitely something that has troubled the department for a while, is that when there's, what do they call that, turnover, and we don't know who we're working with, right? And then the folks that come in, they don't know who they're working with. So that's definitely been an issue. And so I don't know what orienting new staff at DTSC looks like. But it would seem to me that it would be appropriate to have part of the orientation for new staff be engaging with the communities that they're working with as part of that
Can you repeat that? Part of the what for new staff?
I forgot what I said. Sorry. What was that?
Orientation? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that way these folks know who they're working with before we're yelling at them in a public meeting, right? That's not the best introduction to the work ahead of us. Because I think when that doesn't happen, I've seen staff come in who I think understand the issues, are compassionate, right? Like was shared earlier, and they don't take personal offense when community is angry, is upset. They understand that there have been mistakes from the department. Obviously, there's been violations from these industries. So those types of folks are easier to work with, right? It's when folks are defensive, when they take on postures of defending an agency that's failed us, that communicates to us that those aren't folks that are trying to work with us. Those are folks that are trying to move past us, and that's an issue. I think there's an example where the new work program and sorry, Roger, I don't know what the acronym stands for right now, but it's the Workforce Development Program for the Exide Project, right? I think that is something that came about from community pushing. I think if I remember correctly, Oscar Magaña from Maywood was the first person to bring it up in a public meeting, an Exide meeting, that there should be local hire for testing and cleanup in our communities. And then, a year and a half later, we have this work program. And so I think folks at DTSC reached out to get input on what we think the program should be, and even encouraged us to have our members enroll in the program. And I think that has been very successful because that feels like we're working together to solve an issue, right? And so I think that could potentially happen with if there is a development of a public engagement manual. I think it'd be good to actually have constituencies across the state give input into what that looks like, because a lot of us in this room are community engagement specialists, right? And I think we can, for those of us that maybe aren't interested in working for the department, could still give input to what protocols and procedures could look like, right? But I think that also only works if the kind of middle management works with it, right? Because if they're not enforcing that manual, or sometimes maybe they're encouraging bad practices, where does the accountability come in? And I think that's definitely something that that has plagued the department around communications. It definitely really appreciate the split between communications and public participation, because in the past it's felt like public participation is handled like PR, right? Public image control. And whether that comes from communications and then is transferred into public participation, in the past we've often seen roadblocks to information. We ask questions that we think we should get simple answers to, and then we're told there's no information on that, or information on that can't be released. And so that's definitely an issue. One recent example of what looked like image control was some of the media that went out, where folks at DTSC were kind of quoted or paraphrased as saying the reason there hasn't been enough progress on Exide cleanup is because of CEQA compliance. And of course, community members demanded CEQA compliance. And I took personal offense to that, because some of our members were the folks who encouraged that CEQA compliance, folks whose homes right now are contaminated and haven't been cleaned up, because that's the only way we can ensure some level of accountability, right? Kind of agreeing on the side to stuff hasn't worked in the past, and we don't see that as working moving forward. And the idea that stuff isn't moving fast enough on Exide because of CEQA compliance is completely disingenuous. And I had a conversation with Barbara, and I said, well, are y'all not out here collecting property access forms? Are y'all not out here testing properties right? Are y'all not doing this workforce development program? So there's obviously stuff you can do while the CEQA process is unfolding. You're not just sitting around with your arms folded, right? And so I think for folks who don't know the full context, might pick up the LA Times and say, oh, it's the community that stopped this cleanup, right? It's very easy to blame our communities for a lot of things that happen. And I think that it doesn't work well for creating and sustaining good working relationships. That's the way we want to be seen. We want to be seen as partners in this process, right? So I think, again, with that issue with what have we seen with middle management and lack of transparency, it prevents meaningful community engagement, right? And so I think I would like to see for the public participation kind of head to come in, not be from within department. I think there needs to be a search outside of the department. I think when Ana came in, we definitely saw a little bit of a culture shift, right? I mean, obviously, one person isn't going to change a whole department, but I think there's a willingness to see us as partners, to be transparent, to admit where there's limitations versus trying to posture. I think all of that is really helpful. There's some stuff I've shared in other letters, or it maybe isn't the best because I don't want to take up too much time. But sampling protocols need to be examined. I think composite sampling should not be a practice that the department utilizes. There's been composite sampling at school sites here. And so what that does is it waters down the samples, right? If you take, tell folks, I had to change my math a little bit, but if you take 10 samples and 9 of them come back at 30 parts per million of lead, but 1 is at 500, that's seen as everything's fine at that school site versus seeing there's a hot spot at this school site, right? And because it's done in that fashion, we don't actually know what the individual samples are at the school site. So that, again, goes to transparency and data, which at our last meeting, it had to have come up at least like 5 or 6 times on different issues about there not being data, about DTSC staff sharing positions or stating what we're just supposed to accept to be truths, and when we ask for the data, it's not there. And it's really hard to understand why they don't have information at these meetings when there's so many folks from Sacramento coming down, when there's so many folks from their different local offices coming to these meetings. It's kind of like, why are they spending so much money to have such a large presence at these meetings? I think it's to convey commitment to the issue, but then they're not addressing what we're there asking, right? We had to ask for there to be a lawyer at the next meeting because they couldn't answer legal questions. So we're kind of like, you have this huge squad, but you're not ready to address our concerns. That's a big issue, right? And then when it comes,
why do you think that is? Is that a cultural thing?
Well, I think it's definitely a cultural thing. I think, again, the defensive posture, right? It's hard to say, right? Because then when there's rotation in staff, sometimes what I've seen is some staff try to move away from that culture, but it's perpetuated because obviously if your superiors are saying,
because they don't really know the answers, or because they feel that they have to clear it with management?
I think it's a combination. There's definitely been phone calls in the past. We used to do phone calls, I think, every other week. Were those every other week? Those were every other week, right? I don't know, folks. And we would ask questions, and we would be told, well, we can't, respond to that. And so we would ask, can you not respond to that because you don't have the information, or because you're not permitted to release that information? And there was definitely some vagueness in responses. So I think there's definitely a culture issue there, right? I think, when Barbara came in, folks would ask, well, what do you think about Barbara? And I think she's well-meaning. I think she definitely wants to do the right thing. That's what I feel just from my communications with her. But she needs the right folks around her, right? Because if the same folks who have been making these mistakes with DTSC for years are still there, are still the ones advising her, then there's going to continue to be mistakes, right? And so I think, like Cynthia said, there's been some good movement, but there needs to be more. That's for sure.
I'm sure we have a few questions. Do you have some more you wanted to cover?
Yeah, I think, sorry. Oh, an investigation of DTSC. We called for that a long time ago, specifically on this Exide issue, right? So who is responsible for what happened? Right? I think we have a timeline of like chain of events of what has happened over these last couple of decades, but who on the staff is actually responsible? How are we to be sure that they're not in positions of power within the department right now, or are in other agencies within the state or the federal government possibly making the same mistakes? Right? Those are things that need to be addressed, because if not, then there's no transparency on this issue and there's no accountability. Right? And that doesn't allow us to move forward. That always means that there's going to be a distrust for the department unless that part of this issue is resolved, right? And so we can bring in new folks, but unless the department is completely wiped out, there never will be security unless we actually go through that. I was hoping that would be something under the purview of this independent review panel. I imagine that y'all don't have the capacity to actually do that yourselves, or with the staff that you've been provided by the department, which I think would probably be a conflict of interest, right, if the department is investigating itself. So I think it would be appropriate for the independent review panel to call for US EPA, perhaps, to do a full investigation or a completely independent investigation of the department.
How do you respond to folks that say that the priority now should be moving forward and making sure that the cleanup gets the top priority as opposed to spending resources looking backwards? How do you respond to that concern?
I don't think we have to sacrifice one for the other, right? I think, again, if somebody from within the department were to say that, I would say it's disingenuous. I want to hear a commitment to that, and then we'll figure out how we do it and how we fund it. I still haven't heard a commitment to that, right? If they were to say, as soon as we're done cleaning the 1.7 miles, we're going to launch that investigation, at least there's a commitment to do that. There's not even a commitment to do that now. So a question like, should we look back or not look back, is to a certain extent is irrelevant unless there's an actual commitment to do it. Expanding to 4.5 miles on Exide, I think I again had a conversation with Barbara, and it was the department's position that 1.7 miles is what was going to be looked at. And so I said, okay, why not 4.5, right? You need to study the area to 4.5 to know whether we should clean that area up or not. And the response was, well, from the data that we have, we feel like 1.7 is appropriate. And so I said, okay, then you need to come to the next Exide advisory group and present all of your data and defend your position to us. And if you're not prepared to do that, then you're not prepared to make a statement, the statement that you just made. That makes sense, right? I mean, I don't know if I can ask y'all questions. I guess that was more rhetorical. But if they're not prepared to defend their position, then they shouldn't be making that position public.
So what you're saying is your years of activism on this, you still haven't seen the data to justify the 1.7?
No.
Why haven't they shared that with you?
I mean, you can go back to Commerce. We had to force them to look at Commerce. Folks requested a document from the department, and they accidentally sent us the wrong document, and it was looking at step-out sampling in Commerce. We didn't even know that document existed. And that showed elevated levels of lead in this neighborhood across the street.
What have folks told you as to why they're not going? I guess, you've heard this from Barbara, but you just haven't seen the data.
Yeah. I think that's part of it, and then I would argue that not enough data has been collected to even determine that. They shot out these radii looking at different areas, but at a certain point, the department was claiming that they didn't need to go to 1.7.
What do you think of the data that's been shared within the 1.7?
I think looking at the kind of nodes of the graph, I think that was a decent approach to trying to get a bigger picture. I will continue to say this, that I think it was Dr. Love in the county who was able to look at the data and read it differently than the department was reading it. The department was saying, we don't need to go as far as 1.7, doesn't go that far. Dr. Love was like, well, if you actually isolate for wind patterns and you actually look at where you should be looking, then that shows that there's an issue. And it was after that then the department acknowledged that that's the next public meeting. Barbara said, yes, we're going to commit to going to 1.7. And so then the problem with transparency and taking defensive stances is that now the position is, oh yeah, of course, 1.7, that was us. We decided 1.7. They're still out here claiming that they shut down Exide. Google had to correct them they try to come to our space and say that they shut down Exide. And we're like, one, no. Right? That's definitely not what happened. The Department of Justice entered into an agreement with Exide, and that's what shut down Exide. And then two, of course, there was a lot of community pressure that assisted in all of this, right? And so I think, again, it's this defense of the department without acknowledging past wrongs that becomes a barrier to genuinely engaging, right? Because they can say, it was a mistake. We made mistakes. So how are we going to move forward? I think that would go a lot way.
We have many other public commenters. Are there any other questions for Mr. Lopez? Dr. Campbell?
Yes, I have a couple of questions that I would like to ask you. One is the question of historical contamination and lead present in paint and how that has been communicated and discussed to the communities in these areas. What have been communicated to you, and how does the public feel about that communication?
I think at one point, I guess just to take it back to a very early conversation on when the department was going to make its determination of whether to keep the Exide open or not, it was stated that whichever position they could defend in court the best or the easiest would be the position that they would take. So if they could defeat us in court easier than they could defeat Exide, then the facility would stay open, right? And that for me was, I'm not a lawyer. Maybe that's how lawyers look at stuff.
Is that communication done via DTSC or Exide representatives? Exactly how did that work?
That was somebody from DTSC.
Okay, because Exide gave a presentation to us. I don't know if you're aware of that, and they were talking about this historical contamination. And I wanted to know that exactly how that was communicated to the public.
Well, I guess I mentioned that because following, then you had folks in the department who are representing Exide's positions of, well, there's lead in the paint, there's lead in gas, so it could be from all of these different things, as opposed to listening to folks when we're telling them there's ways to tell whether it's Exide lead or it's not Exide lead. And now they moved in a direction, but then again, will not acknowledge that they had a different position previously.
Okay. One other question that I have is, now that there are dedicated personnel for Exide, how do you feel that has changed the public opinions and basically how the public views the Exide situation? Has that improved it now that you have like dedicated personnel? Because you talked about this turnover and how it kind of made it difficult to form kind of a relationship with the people who are representing DTSC.
Yeah, I don't know if that's really made an impact yet. I think part of it is community members fought for the $176.6 million, and there's no transparency on how it's being used. So I think if there was, for example, at the next advisory group, a breakdown of the budget, here are the new hires, here are their roles, here they are, I think that would go a long way.
Have you communicated that with the public representatives and just the dedicated personnel that has been assigned to Exide?
No. I mean, there's so many issues I didn't even put that down on the sheet.
But that's kind of something that might be important.
Yeah,
Things
totally.
that would build that relationship. If transparency of this budget is one of those issues that the public feel is important, put it down, communicate that to these individuals that are dedicated for the Exide situation, so that.
Yeah, definitely. Someone before you in the department should have posed that question, right? You're communicating to me that you're looking to solve this issue, And that isn't what's always communicated to us with the department, right? So folks want to get past the issue. So I definitely appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Vice Chair?
Yeah, can you either give an example or describe what you mentioned turnover, what that means to you? I mean, is it, for instance, is every time you talk to somebody from DTSC, it's a different person, or every year or every 2 years? Can you expand on that a little bit, please?
Yeah, so I'll give you an example. I wasn't personally in the meeting. It was somebody else from our staff that was in the meeting, and other folks that are here today. And somebody from GTSC who first showed us some of the early soil sample scores committed to a timeline of cleaning up those homes that had already been sampled and testing more homes. And then that Friday was their last day in the department. And so I imagine that they knew they already had given their notice that they were leaving the department. So why would they make that commitment, right? And then there's a gap. And then they bring someone else on, and they're here for a couple months, and then they're gone, and then there's a gap, right? And then when it comes to community engagement, specialists actually out doing the work, I mean, how many projects do they got, right? How much time can they dedicate to X? I think that's part of the fight for the money is we want dedicated staff to this. We don't want them working on multiple projects. We want this money being utilized for this, not to fill gaps.
So you said we want dedicated staff. We don't want them working on multiple projects.
Yeah, I mean, and I've shared this in letters in the EIR process that there's work being done to open an office here. The staff located here should be dedicated to working on this issue.
I appreciate that, but let's hypothesize that there's 1,000, and I'm confident there's 1,000 sites in California, actually.
Totally.
We haven't even identified yet. How would you propose that DTSC get a team, or, I mean, where are the resources going to come from for something like that? I mean, what do you think? I'm just curious.
I mean, so we have the 176.6 million, right? Either way, however you divide up the funds, this work needs to get done. It's either done spread across multiple staff members, or you could dedicate staff as opposed to dividing them up, right? That's how I would go about it. I've recommended that a pod be created to actually pilot what an ideal team, DTSC team could look like, how it could function. Basically embody what the culture shift of the department should be, and then assess that and potentially replicate that within the department. I mean, if we're talking about billable hours, there's plenty of work on this Excite issue to, I think, I don't know, I haven't looked, I mean, maybe the actual folks who budget their hours would be better to speak on this, but I think there's enough work, enough billable hours to have full-time staff dedicated to Excite.
And I number one, I agree with you that in an ideal world we've got dedicated staff, and there's no turnover or very little. I mean, you know, but that's why I'm kind of hitting you on. I'm trying to explore your thoughts on it to get, because I'm not sure that's realistic given resources. But that's why I'm you know on that one. But to go rather than belabor that too much, I'm still thinking about it. But I just want to point out that the reason I'm pounding on it is because I think I agree with you, but I need to understand more and figure out how this could work. The other one you said that caught my attention, and I don't, you're certainly not alone in voicing this, is that public participation, from your perspective, looked more like a public relations outfit or project than a public participation project. Have you seen any progress away from that perspective, where it's more of a community engagement and a real public participation?
Yeah, I've definitely seen that with some of the new staff that have been brought on. Again, I think my concern would be is if they're spread too thin or spread across multiple projects, and then the influence of the existing DTSC culture in moving those folks into being less productive, into being less, basically not being as good at public engagement as they are now. I mean, I think we'll be able to assess that maybe in a couple of months. But as of now, I think there's definitely been some improvements. But I think it's definitely important to acknowledge that improving, where was the starting point? The starting point was pretty bad, right? So I don't think we're at where we need to be, but I think there's definitely improvements.
Okay, and final thing is that either if you've written something or maybe we could talk later about just your pod concept. I'm kind of interested in your thoughts on that. But I don't want to spend too much. I don't want to use up all the time tonight with the dialogue between the two of us.
A couple other comments or questions. One of the things that the panel was going to be considering for the October report on public outreach is whether or not DTSC needs a board or commission, similar to a resources board, for example. Do you have any thoughts on that?
That's the first time I hear of that. I think, so this would be like an appointed board or something like that? That would focus on public engagement?
Just like just like your resources board oversees ARB, this would be a board that oversees DTSC. What do you think about that?
I mean, I think at the very least, it would provide the opportunity of accountability, because it is very hard to hold the department accountable right now, right? So I think whether it would work or not, how many years it might take us to get it to work or not, right, in the way we want. But I think it depends on the level of power that they would be able to wield over the department.
The draft DIR, I believe, is coming out on the cleanup of the Exide site and demolition and that sort of stuff. Is that it's coming out soon? Is that the case?
It should be. I'm not sure about the timeline, but
do you has East Yard expressed an opinion on what to do about the kettles?
Yeah. It's been a couple of months since I remembered that, but
maybe you can get that to us. Has the department laid groundwork with the advisory group on the communication of what their preferred remedy is? Do you know?
No, I think the last communication that we got was that they were just kind of like, we don't really know what to do. There was a question about a metallurgist and whether there was one on staff, and there isn't, or there wasn't. I don't know if they brought one on since. And so there was a lot of concern that the experts were all people who work for Exide. And so therefore that would be the opinion that would carry the most weight. And so then that's what would happen, right? So that was a concern that a lot of folks expressed.
So do you agree that how DTSC communicates its proposed remedy to deal with the kettles and the confidence with which the public interprets that decision is going to be a very important test of how the public participation and outreach group is functioning at this department?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, it's one of the biggest issues that came up during the public participation process. And so I imagine, just hypothetically speaking, if the preferred alternative was to come back and turn the kettles on, I think there would definitely be public outcry.
So again, we are going to be writing a report in October on public outreach. It'd be really helpful, Mr. Lopez, if you would maybe submit to us in writing some of the things that you've learned, both strengths and needs, from the work group for Exide, and things that could help inform our report. We really appreciate that, and want to thank you for all the work you've been doing, all the organizing, you, Hugo, the whole group there at East Yard, and of course also for helping us set this meeting up tonight.
One more follow-up on the kettles. Mm-hmm. So if they've got negative pressure and there's no emissions, you still think the community's outcry is more important than worker safety?
What he said, but
yeah, I was like, did I say that? No, I mean,
balancing act with what you do with the kettles.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely understand that you turn on the kettles, there's public outcry because of the perception there's going to be emissions. You use some other alternative. The workers might be exposed to something. You can argue, well, what type of protective gear are they wearing, right? All of that is really what we're going to be able to see in the draft EIR. And so I think I think I need to see it. I'll be honest. I need to read it and understand all of that detail before I say this is what it is. What I will say is I don't trust people who work for Exide. I went and visited the site and they were telling me things that I know aren't true. They were saying things that were contradictory to what the department has been saying. So I would definitely question if the only authority on making a decision were to come from experts that are funded by Exide.
Mark, quickly, if there was local hire for removing those kettles, would there be a little bit more of a transparent communication between those local hires and DTSC and Exide in facilitating that removal?
You know, I think that might help with trust from the community, because especially if there was some way that the workers could communicate out what the process is looking like. Again, when we toured the site, Exide was claiming that they were like, me and this dude right here are going to do it. And I'm just like, what? Like, nah, no way. That's ridiculous, right? So
Just something to maybe communicate to representatives.
yeah.
It's going to be a very interesting, but again, a real test of this department's public participation and outreach. Thank you very much, Mr. Lopez.
Can I mention one more thing?
It's your room.
Interagency collaboration is an issue. I think AQMD and Exide AQMD and DTSC have definitely been working on that. But as an example, some of our members tested soil in the LA River, and right outside of the Maywood Riverfront Park, down in the river, the soil had 1,941 parts per million lead. And that's just south of the Exide facility, right? And this is probably the #1 location where folks in Southeast LA engage with the river because of the Riverfront Park. And down where kids are playing, I saw kids playing down there today, right? I saw an older gentleman, he was exercising, running up and down the hill.
What you just led into one of my favorite subjects. I hate to. Well, we're going to keep you up there. What if instead of the three of us, you had an appropriate level official from the Regional Water Board, from AQMD and DTSC up here answering your questions, responding to your concerns? What would you think about a concept like that?
Well, I think it would be about adding them to the advisory group. Right?
And Department of Public Health, or the county public health too.
So I think all of those folks, except for anybody having to do with water, are already part of the advisory group. And I think the difference between the advisory group and a venue like this is that there's more dialogue, right? So I might say something, and then Jane might throw something else out, and Terry Marquez might throw something else out, and Felipe from Maywood might riff back, and so I think there's a little more of a collaborative nature there, which is positive. Yeah, I mean, I think there's other issues with the advisory group, but I think it would be about adding folks that have authority over water into that venue.
So, but I could see what my thing is. You make the membership based on what the problem is. I'm not just thinking in terms of Exide.
I see what you're saying. Like for this board that is being considered.
Yeah, in lieu of a board, instead of a board, but to give to have the same process and have the experts from the different agencies that were involved, not just one agency or not just one board. I mean,
I think in theory it might work, but we need to do that full department investigation to make sure that they weren't working here 10 years ago making these bad decisions and are now working for the water board or something, right? So I think a lot of this stuff fits together. Yeah.
Thank you. I think, Larry, do you remember the difficulties that you had obtaining information on metal sampling in the LA River from the LA Water Board? How was that process, trying to get transparent information from the LA Water Board on whether there was lead detected in the outfalls near Exide? How was that process for you?
It was hard to interpret what we got, though, wasn't it? I mean, was I the only person who had a hard time interpreting that?
Yeah, we're in the public comment period, so we don't want to get too far, but I don't think we ever did get answers, actually,
We really
of what
didn't.
was in that outfall.
Yeah.
Okay, the next is Jane Williams. Ms. Williams? California Communities Against Toxics. And just a time check, panelists, at 7 o'clock. We'll probably take a quick break at 7:30 just to hit the restroom.
Good evening. I am Jane Williams. I'm the Executive Director of California Communities Against Toxics, which is a statewide network of environmental justice organizations. Interestingly enough, I wanted to give everybody a little bit of a history lesson today. In 1992, I started doing the work that I do now. And one of the first things I did was I appeared at the confirmation hearing for James Strzok. James Strzok was the first Cal EPA director. He came from US EPA, where he was an enforcement person. And he had to be confirmed in front of the Senate Rules Committee. And at that time, I was very involved with a local group that was fighting the burning of hazardous waste in a cement kiln not far from where I live. And it was very interesting because the state had written a letter to the Region 9 administrator. And it was actually the existing DTSC director and Mr. Strzok himself that had signed this letter. And this letter said, the state of California will do anything it takes to keep National Cement open and operating, burning hazardous waste. Because at that time, it was one of the only places in the state that you could burn hazardous waste in. It was a cement kiln. We blew this letter up, and we took it to the Senate Rules hearing. And David Roberti was the chair of Senate Rules. And he raked Secretary Strzok over the coals and the existing DTSC director over the coals, and I'll never forget what he said to them. He said, this legislature is the body where the tension between politics and power and money is meted out. It is not in the enforcement and implementation of environmental laws. Mr. Strzok, are you sure you understand that? And Mr. Strzok, of course, said he understood that. And, of course, he was confirmed. But it's funny for me to think back on that day, sort of the first days that I was a professional policy advocate for environmental justice, and to think about today, where you asked a number of questions and you had Mr. Lopez up here for, I don't know, at least a half an hour. And it's exactly the same thing. It's exactly the same situation 20 years later. And ironically, as we all know, Exide operated on an interim status permit. And so did National Cement. It was given permission on interim status to burn liquid hazardous waste. At various times, it burned 3 times more than its permit. It polluted the heck out of local communities. The reason people wanted the facility closed was because everybody around there was sick and dying. And as I think over the history between 1992 and now, the department has actually had very, very, very stable decision making. It's made the same mistakes consistently over and over and over and over again. And I want to tell you one of those mistakes that was actually made in this administration by Barbara Lee. And that is that, and this is a very interesting story, and I first want to preface this for everybody in the room. I am not attacking the director. I am not attacking the secretary. I am not trying to, say what a terrible thing is. But it is extremely interesting to me how the same decisions can get made over and over and over and over again. Even when you put new people in there, did the same decisions. So Edwards Air Force Base, which is near where I live, it's the largest Superfund site in the country. Lots of different problems there. I won't go into it. But they wanted a permit to open burn hazardous waste. Now, many people, when I tell them that the state of California grants permits to open burn hazardous waste, think that I have lost my mind. I have not. And in fact, the state of California is one of the few states in the country, it's in the top 5 for hazardous waste burning, open burning of hazardous waste, which was actually outlined by Congress when RCRA was passed in the 70s.
Most of the military sites, or?
Yes, they're all military. No, actually, there's one private site that we found, military sites. So and I'm just going to give you this one example. Most of the hazardous waste that's open burned in the state of California is open burned at the China Lake Naval Weapons Center, but that's a whole different story. So Edwards Air Force Base had munitions, and it wanted to open burn them. And it had wanted to open burn them for like 15 years. And it had a permit that it had requested with a health risk assessment and a CEQA document and an alternatives analysis and all these things that go along with the permit. Well, all of a sudden, Secretary Lee comes in, and there's a permit backlog. Well, you know, one of the first things that looks bad is you got all these permits that have been hanging out there forever, so we're going to get rid of these permits. And so this permit starts moving. So I took 2 weeks out of my normal activities working on all these other and I think, I'm going to work in my own backyard. And I take a look at all these great alternatives that exist for the destruction of hazardous waste that do not require open burning. I am wondering why they want to open burn this waste, because the Department of Transportation won't let them transport it because it has proprietary chemicals in it. So DOT told them, you can't transport it off of Edwards. And so Edwards went to the state and said, okay, let us open burn it. And so I talked to experts around the world. I talked to the United Nations. I talked to all these different people. They said, yeah, of course, there's alternatives. There's alternatives that are in use all over the world to destroy these chemicals without open burning it. So I put my comments in. You know, it's public comment period. Get my comments in. They actually had to reopen the comment period because they didn't notice me, even though I'm the mandatory mailing list. I get noticed on everything the department does. I didn't get noticed on that, which I thought was pretty weird. So they reopened it. I put my comments in. And then they're like, no, we're going to issue the permit. Like, you're going to issue the permit? Your CEQA document's 15 years old. Your alternatives assessment is wrong. It says that there are no alternatives when there's clearly alternatives in use. They're like, no, we're issuing the permit. Okay, we issue the permit, so I appeal the permit. And now this is where the process gets very interesting. So you appeal the permit. You know, you put your comments on there. You write your appeal. It's an administrative appeal. And you're thinking, like, what? At the Energy Commission, you know, you get an administrative law judge, right? At the state board, you go in front of the whole board. You know, you walk into the board, you appeal something that they've done, that the regional boards have done, you get a hearing in front of the board. You appeal something in a court of law, you know, you get a judge, right? No, here you get a staff person. At DTSC, if you appeal a permit, that permit appeal goes to a staff person. And that staff person makes a decision like in 30 days. There's no board, there's no nothing. And she basically says, like, one paragraph, your appeal's denied. So now I have Edwards Air Force Base burning proprietary chemicals, literally in my backyard, right? And my neighbors call me all the time, oh my God, what the hell is going on? I woke up and I can't breathe and this and that. And I'm like, yeah, well, they're probably open burning whatever they're open burning. We don't know what they're burning because it's proprietary, right? So this gets to, and I want to say I am uniquely qualified to talk about the department. The department used to be part of Health and Human Services, and it was moved in 1992 when I first started my career and became one of the family members of Cal EPA. I have worked with every subsequent director of the department. I have appealed permits. I've participated in permitting. I've worked on site mitigation. I've worked, you know, on the green chemistry, you know, creation of the green chemistry program. And
Battery fee passed, last piece of legislation.
Yes, we did get the battery fee passed, and we are hoping and waiting for the governor to sign that, and it will hopefully generate about $500 million over the next decade to help clean up not only Exide but other ghost smelters. So the problem that the department has in its public involvement program, I gave you the story of this appeal process. Because if you look at the other Cal EPA boards and directorates, as they came from other different places, they came with a superstructure. The State Water Resources Control Board, they have board members. And if you want to appeal something, those board members hear your appeal. The Air Board, we just added environmental justice members to the Air Board so that we get a more balanced impact and more balanced decisions. Permits, lots of things can be appealed, right? At the Energy Commission, you get an administrative law judge. The PUC, you get an administrative law judge. But at DTSC, you get a staff person. And so that, when I look at how the department is actually structured, I'm not exactly sure why. In its original incarnation, when it was part of Health and Human Services, it didn't have more oversight. But now it's like it's time to, you know, bump it up. The department has lots of problems, and it has lots of challenges. We're asking this department to engage at Exide in one of the largest cleanups that the country has ever seen. we're asking it to spend $500 million and clean up 5 square miles. Thousands of homes, hundreds of thousands of people, tremendous amount of public involvement and public fury over the department's past actions. And basically, we're letting the director take all that heat. So I could stand up here and I could tell you more Department of Toxic Substance Control stories, but I think that partly part of the problem with public involvement is that 2 things. One, there's no architecture for public involvement. So there is a director of public involvement, but if you're unhappy about how things are going, say in a permit, all you have is this appeal process, where if you had a board, you could go and say, we just had an issue with the state board, and we called up one of the state board members and we said, hey, we got a problem. She's like, let's work together to solve it. I'm like, great. And so, we're working with staff and we're working to solve a problem. That doesn't really happen at the department because the department doesn't have a board that's appointed or elected or somehow created. The second problem with public participation is that it's kind of carved out. And I mean, they're kind of the stepchild of the department, if you want to know. The project managers, they're running site mitigation and cleanups. The permit folks, they are seen as engineers, doctors, lawyers, merchants, chiefs. The public involvement people, they're the stepchild. They're guys that, you pull them out of the closet, you make them put out some fact sheets. They're not seen as an integral piece of the decision-making process in the department.
Do you agree that they have some of the hardest jobs at the department?
Absolutely. I would say they have the hardest job because it's the software. It's not the hardware. An engineering decision gets made based on your engineering specs. A toxicology decision gets made based on, reference doses and dose response curves and how much is coming out. And the public involvement part is really, and it's very interesting to think about the architecture of public involvement when it comes to the implementation of different environmental laws. Because RCRA, which is the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, which is the designee is DTSC for the federal RCRA laws. It is one of the few pieces of a federal law that had its public involvement greatly increased in the last 20 years. And that was when Carol Browner passed the Enhanced Public Participation Rulemaking. And she did that because of RCRA permitting issues. And that she felt at that time there was not enough public involvement in the permitting of sites that treat and store and dispose of hazardous waste. And so she passed this enhanced public involvement law that said before you go to a state or a federal, a program that's being run by the feds, before you want a RCRA permit, you have to go hold a public hearing. You have to go tell the public, we're coming to your town and we are going to treat or dispose or store of hazardous waste. And that was a revolution in that implementation of that environmental law.
Can I ask you a question, Ms. Williams?
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt you. But EPA doesn't have a board or commission, so why should DTSC?
EPA does have boards and commissions, actually. If you appeal, I'm glad you asked me that because I'm going there. During the Clinton administration, during the time when Carol Browner was US EPA, the director of US EPA, she also created the Remedy Review Board and the Appeals Board. She fundamentally changed the architecture of RCRA. And unfortunately, those changes in architecture have not translated into the state programs. So if you're granted a RCRA permit, you can appeal that permit to an appellate board, an actual appellate board. The Remedy Review Board works inside the Superfund program and the RCRA Corrective Action Program. It's used both by the public and industry and internally to the departments that are looking mostly at Superfund sites, right? Because most of the RCRA programs are administered by the state. So it's mostly Superfund programs that go to the Remedy Review Board.
With some of the sites for those different entities?
Pardon?
Provide our staff with some of the legal citations or CFR citations for those boards and commissions within EPA?
Absolutely. So what I'm saying to you is that although RCRA has this public involvement piece that is very robust. And it was enhanced in the early 90s because of tremendous concerns about the types of projects you're seeing, the open burning of hazardous waste at military reservations, the construction and operation of highly toxic facilities like lead smelters, right? How many facilities are still on interim status? When was RCRA passed? In the 70s? We still have facilities that don't have full RCRA Part B permits. Do we know why? Yes, we do, because they can't pass their risk assessments. So when I'm looking down these permits in these other states and I'm looking at all these facilities on interim status, I know those are some of the highest risk facilities that we have in this country. And they haven't been able to get their permits, right? So long story short, there is an architecture to DTSC that needs to be reformed. It needs to be updated. And it's not just like a remedy review board and an appellate board, but make it look more like the state board and make those members look more like the people that the department is actually interacting with, which are primarily communities of color, low-income communities, environmental justice communities. So I don't know if there's any other questions, but I just wanted to kind of give you a little bit of that trot through history and a little bit about the changing architecture of the implementation of RCRA at the federal level.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. We'll open up for questions and do want to applaud your efforts in getting that battery fee bill passed. It was a Herculean effort. I know you're not going to spike the football in the end zone until the governor signs the bill, but no matter what happens, it's acknowledged how much effort with tremendous effectiveness you put in on that. Any additional questions for Ms. Williams?
And also the speaker and the pro tem and Christina Garcia, Assemblymember Garcia, I believe whose district we're in. Huge kudos goes to them for working so cooperatively and diligently on this with the governor's office.
Is that true that it was actually the very last bill passed in the session?
Yes.
Vice Chair?
Did I understand you to say there's a permitted hazardous waste incinerator in the state of California?
There was.
There was. There is no more, correct?
No more. And it was not a hazardous waste incinerator. It was a cement kiln that was allowed to burn hazardous waste.
Okay, yep. And those are all gone, the cement kilns for?
There is no hazardous waste burning cement kilns in the state of California anymore, and all of the hazardous waste incineration capacity has been closed. I think there might be one facility in Pittsburgh that's allowed to burn hazardous waste in a boiler like 1 or 2 times a month the last time I looked. But for the most part, because of tremendous public opposition, the incineration of hazardous waste in California is essentially ended almost a generation ago.
Okay. It's consistent with mine. I got lost. Yep, thank you.
Right. So I was giving you a little history lesson there, Mr. Vizier. Right?
Yeah, I understand, but and I appreciate it.
So there used to be a board looking at the integrated waste management in the state, the Integrated Waste Management Board. That board was taken away and replaced with Cal Recycle. So there are those folks that say that perhaps that's the direction that we should be going in, is having less boards and commissions. So why would we consider going back to boards and commissions for DTSC? And they would cite Cal Recycle as an example. How do you respond to that?
Well, first of all, DTSC never had a board or a commission, right? It's always had the architecture that it has today. And I think that that's problematic. Because if you think very carefully about what happened after RCRA was passed, there were tens of thousands of facilities that had to get regulated by someone. And so the US EPA took their RCRA authorization and granted it to different states. And they had to do that very quickly to implement the law. And that was done in the late 70s. So, and that's where interim status came about, right? So all those facilities that were going to have to eventually get RCRA Part B permits were all put on interim status. And they were actually told that they had to get final permits going through a NEPA or a CEQA process and a risk assessment and a full RCRA Part B or Part X or Subpart X type of permitting process within a fairly short period of time. And if you think about the amazing amount of paperwork and everything that was going on then. So the department was created to fulfill that need. The need that the department fulfills now is a completely different need. We hardly ever grant RCRA permits. In fact, the permit granted to Edwards is probably one of the first new RCRA permits that have been granted in the state in a decade. There's only less than a half a dozen RCRA permits, new RCRA permits granted in the entire country in a year. So we went from an agency whose job it was to permit facilities to now really an agency whose job it is to oversee and clean up legacy pollution. And those are two different skill sets. And that's why I really wanted to acknowledge the fact that it's a difficult job, because the statutes and the regulations, they didn't foresee really where we are right now. When we look at groundwater contamination, when we look at Exide, these are legacy issues. And the department is going to spend the next decades of its life cleaning up pollution that was primarily deposited before it was created. Well, again, CalRecycle was not created to solve problems that were created 50 years ago or 60 years ago or 70 years ago, right? CalRecycle is primarily a permitting agency, just like DTSC was when it was created in the late 70s. CalRecycle is to permit an infrastructure of solid waste facilities. It is to implement our e-waste programs, right? It doesn't really deal with legacy issues, so to speak. So, I mean, I don't know, I have to really...
Argument that those legacy issues require more public participation?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Legacy issues require more public involvement. They require more public involvement because you are, first of all, there's two main programs, as you know, with DTSC. There's permitting and permitting enforcement, and then there's the site mitigation program. And I know that as the IRP has been meeting for the last over a year now, the majority of the testimony that you have heard has been regarding the site mitigation program, not the permitting program, and not so much the enforcement program or the CUPA program, which we could get into. It's site mitigation that most people on the ground, the activism around in the department is around site mitigation. And most of the site mitigation that the department is dealing with was caused before the department was created. And so it is, I really want to emphasize, it's a completely different set of skills. And primarily on the ground, when you're going to come into someone's community, and May was a perfect example, where they wanted to use the electrical resistance heating and superheat the ground and boil the stuff and drive it off and burn it. I mean, if you don't have good public involvement and you don't have good responses to concerns, people are going to stop your remedies. I've been part of people stopping remedies. I know that people can stop remedies, you know, just like people can jerk permits. They'll find a way. When the communities get mad enough, they'll find a way to stop a permit, either from being issued or after it's been issued, taking it away from people. So that's why the public involvement piece at DTSC really needs to be elevated. And I love, you know, Mark's idea of sort of like pods of people. It's like there's a project manager, there's an engineer, there's the experts, there's the public involvement people. Because one of DTSC's fundamental problems is I say that they're a fortress with a moat. Over and over and over again on so many different projects I work on with the department, they see themselves as a fortress, and it's either they'll put the moat down for industry or they'll put the moat down for you know, public involvement, and they put the drawbridges back up, right? They see themselves as this very insular organization, not as like, I'm going to come to your house, Dr. Campbell, and we're going to make a garden together, you know? And I'm going to bring some plants, and you're going to bring some plants, and we're going to create a garden, and we're going to make this thing grow. That's not how the department acts. It doesn't act that way now. It hasn't acted that way in the past, and I don't imagine it's going to act that way in the future.
Jane,
because of the different pressures that are on it.
Do you think that the communications department is large enough, or do you feel that it should become larger or get more resources?
The public involvement department?
The communications department at DTSC, the public outreach program. I know that communication itself, there are 22 individuals in that. I think that's with public outreach and other factors involved. But do you think that's large enough to provide what is necessary?
Okay, when you say communications, usually I think of that as like people who are talking to the press. Okay.
I think public involvement is part of that communications department based on the. Isn't that part of the 22, the communications department, the 22 individuals that basically are responsible for that? That was my understanding, that basically the entire department is 22 individuals.
I think the question, to hone it down, would be, do they have enough, and we're really talking about site, and I suspect they can handle the permitting load pretty well and have got that down, but do they have enough people to engage with the community without turnover, without too many sites, to be effective in the large number of complex legacy areas that need to be taken care of in some fashion? Do they have enough public participation?
Is that the question?
Yes.
Okay. So in general, I would say no. And I think that for a couple different reasons. First of all, the department's public involvement staff should reflect the communities that they're involved in. And often it does not. I think we're getting better, but certainly in the past it has not. So we need folks who are hired into public involvement to actually have the skill sets that they need to involve the public and for themselves to stay involved with the public, right? Whether that is their educational background, whether that's their life experience, or whether that's the language that they speak. But, you know, it's like, I'm an economist. I cannot go fly an airplane. I don't know how, and I'm not going to learn. So we really need to be mindful about the unique role that the public involvement and public participation specialists play in the department. And the ironic thing about public involvement is that the way I've seen it on the ground, the less skill the public involvement department specialist has, the more skill that the community has at getting that person involved and getting involved in a permitting process or a site mitigation process. It's like if you have a good public involvement specialist, things go much smoother on the ground. And if you don't, it's like waving a red flag in front of the public, right? So they get more involved.
Today in Riverside, we were having some of these discussions, and it was told that during some of these public outreach meetings, you'll have like 5 public participant individuals from DTSC, and that the public actually finds that intimidating, that there's no need for more individuals, there just needs to be a better communication sort of a thing.
I think my understanding of that, and
Sure.
we're getting outside of that.
I think it's important, though,
No, it's
because
just the discussions between you and Ms. Williams, not between you
Okay.
and the vice chair,
Sure.
because we haven't agendized it that way.
Sure. I just want to make sure that we kind of have a clear understanding of what the public is telling us we should put in our governor report. And I had actually suggested that we provide more resources to the community outreach, the public outreach. And some of the points that were made was that that's really not necessary, that really there's enough individuals. The problem sometimes is maybe there's too many individuals involved in a specific site. How's your feeling about that? Do you feel that's true?
I mean, I can't speak for what's going on there, but usually there's one public involvement specialist that's assigned to a site. There's one person, and that one person's job is to take public, be accessible to the public and to interface with the project manager and the DTSC team. I have never seen a site that's had more than one public involvement specialist until Exide. And I have worked on probably more sites than anybody in the state.
So the
There's
DTSC
one public involvement specialist. Now,
So-
if 5 people come to a meeting, I don't know who those 5 people are.
Okay.
But there's one public involvement specialist normally assigned to one facility, whether it's a permitting facility or it's a site mitigation project.
Okay.
So clearly a project like Exide, which is huge, absolutely huge. We're talking about cleaning up an area that's the size of a city with hundreds of thousands of people. One public involvement specialist is probably not enough. You probably need one for almost every community, one for East LA, one for Commerce, one for Maywood.
What do you think about Santa Susana, for example?
Santa Susana is a huge problem. It is extremely complicated, and it is very messy. I mean, to me, yeah, having a couple people involved in Santa Susana would be great. There's a lot of work there, and there's a lot of communication that needs to occur. And that one of the problems is if you don't have adequate public involvement specialists, then your project manager is getting phone calls all the time from all these different people trying to figure out what's going on with your project, right? And that's taking him away or her away from the project management.
So do you think it would be fair for us to put in our governor report that some of these complex, large-scale sites really require dedicated public relations individuals?
Absolutely.
Okay.
On large sites like Exide, Bayview Hunters Point, Santa Susana, having someone show up, once every 6 months to a meeting and sending out a fact sheet on a large complex site is not adequate. You're not doing yourself justice and you're not doing the public justice.
Thank you.
Additional questions for Ms. Williams? Vice Chair?
Within the U.S. EPA, the Superfund cleanups, is there, as I understood it, is there a appellate board for those two?
No, the appellate board is for permitted on the permitting side. The remedy review board is on the remedy side.
Which review board? I'm sorry.
The remedy, it's called remedy review board. Remedy.
Yep. Okay.
So on the remedy review board, that's for the site mitigation program. The appeals side, I believe they hear appeals either primarily on permitting, but they can also hear appeals for any kind of permitting, including permitting that would be required for some sort of site mitigation project.
Okay. Did they reside at headquarters or in each region?
No, they're at headquarters.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. I know you're just an economist, but if I was on the plane and something happened to the pilot, we would call you up to the cockpit, okay?
Well, we'd all be in trouble, okay?
You definitely would trust you more than me in that role. Okay, it's 7:38. We only have 3 more public comment cards, so if there are additional public comments, please fill out the card in the back and give that to Mike. But we've been going for just over 2 hours, so we're going to take a 5-minute break for the restrooms. We will reconvene at 7:45. Thank you. Okay, we're going to call ourselves back to order for the September 21st, 2016 meeting of the Department of Toxic Substances Control Independent Review Panel. We are on item 6, which is the continued public comment. Note some other folks have joined us. We have Patrice Bowen, who is heading up the Department's Public Participation Program. If you want to stand, Patrice, and wave to the group here. Welcome. And probably some other folks here in the audience. Apologize if I can't see everyone or acknowledge everyone. Yes, and Francesca, who we mentioned before, Francesca Negrete, the Chief Deputy Director for the Department, has joined us. I think she was in the hall when we acknowledged her previously. We're now going to take comment from Lisa Lappin at the Teachers Union of Paramount, People's Senate active member. Hi, welcome.
So I don't have a history of being an activist and an organizer and a politician like many of the people here. I'm a teacher of elementary school, but I have become an environmental activist out of necessity, watching my student die, watching my colleagues get sick, watching myself get sick, the residents around the school, and in the dozens and dozens. So I've brought this attention to everyone I can. There's a district attorney investigation that's been open and is still open for 6 years. I went to the environmental agencies, Jane Williams, California Communities Against Toxins. I went to Communities for a Better Environment, California Safe Schools. I've been to Environmental Justice. I'm approaching National Resources Defense Council and the American Civil Liberties Union. There isn't any way I'm going to stop because I watched my student die, and I want some justice in the community of Paramount. I want to know why the children are dying, and I want it fixed. And so I don't know how to tell you to fix the agency. that's not really what I'm here to do, except to say that as a member of the People's Senate, I do think that there is a lack of communication between the Air Quality Management District, the Health Department, the EPA, and Department of Toxic Control, and all the other regulatory agencies seem to all be working in isolation. 2 weeks ago, the Air Quality Management District held a meeting in Paramount. They invited the residents the day of the meeting, and the acting CEO was there, and 8 other scientists and staff members they told the community that there's been a spike in hexavalent chromium, and they don't know where it's coming from. And the woman leading the meeting said, "We don't know where it's coming from. We need you to call 1-800-CUT-SMOG." The community's been calling 1-800-CUT-SMOG for years now. The people don't know what to do. I believe this issue is pretty much known throughout the state, maybe even up to the Senator Feinstein's office, Governor Brown. I wouldn't be surprised if they already know about Carlton Forge, and yet it seems that no one's doing anything about it. There's all kinds of investigations going on and nothing being done. And so that's my concern. You can have 10 investigations, but something needs to be done. If there is a spike in hexavalent chromium, they don't know where it's coming from. And yet they say that in the next 2 weeks, Carlton Forge is going to have to come forward to the community to reveal their health risk assessment that the Air Quality Management District required they do 3 years ago, which has failed in some ways, and so there's elevated risk of cancer possibilities. So they're going to have to send notices to the parents and hold a meeting. Department of Toxic Control is investigating Carlton Forge. They have an ongoing investigation. They got a grant from the EPA to investigate further, but nothing's being done. So it's 6 years now. More people that we've been aware of it. More people are getting sick, and whether it's Carlton Forge or whether it's other companies or a combination, cumulative effect, whatever it is, there isn't anyone really taking lead to figure out what's wrong. It seems like each agency kind of passes the buck to the other. Oh, well, the lead agency is this. Well, the lead agency is that. And the environmental groups. Well, this group. Well, that group. There's no environmental group in charge backing this issue up. There's no agency backing it up. It's pretty much me and the teachers union. And it's too much for me. And I think some people who are equipped to deal with this need to actually deal with it. Jane Williams has done a lot, but an investigation and results need to come. So if you're finding, I'm told by the project manager that they found contamination within 200 feet of the perimeter of the facility. Well, there's a public skate park there in the city, and that's within 200 feet of the facility. But that park remains open. The city of Paramount refused the Department of Toxic Control access to this park, told them they could not take a soil sample at that park or any park. And that's public record on the internet on the DTSC report. I called the city manager and asked him what was his rationale for that decision. He said, we didn't have one. So not only is no one taking charge, but there's absolute blatant disregard. And this is an issue of environmental justice or lack of. And so, I'm asking that there's hexavalent chromium. If there is, I don't care where it's coming from, it needs to stop and it needs to be cleaned up. So I'm really hoping that with the new employee that you've hired from AQMD, there will be some change, at least in the cleanup process, and that there will be a reduction. The residents say the companies operating day and night. They're hearing sounds. They're smelling things they've never smelled or heard before. This is blatantly going on, and no one's doing anything. So that's my concern. And then there's other companies around there too. A cumulative effect. So I have another concern, is that if there's going to be risk assessment reports and action plans and investigations, when a company hires another company to do their report, it's a conflict of interest. The company that's doing the investigation and the report should not be directly paid by the potential polluter, but should be paid by the Department of Toxic Control and the people in the state of California. If the polluter or alleged polluter thinks that there's something unfair, they can always appeal it, and there could be a second agency double checking. But to allow agencies to hire their own investigators and risk analysis reporters is like, those reports become as if they've been written by their own lawyers. And so that's an obvious conflict of interest, and probably not just in the Paramount case, but all throughout the state. The agencies doing the investigation should not be selected, in my opinion, by the polluter. So that's about all. I think there should be more public participation. There's been one workshop, and Jane Williams was a huge part of getting that workshop and to getting this investigation going, and Robina from California Safe Schools and Communities for a Better Environment. They were all involved in getting this going, but once it's going, there isn't anyone really in charge. So I would like to ask the Department of Toxic Control to become the lead agency and to take charge and make sure that they're communicating with AQMD and the Health Department and all of the other agencies so that it doesn't fall on an environmental group or a teacher or a teachers union. So that's my request, and you could take back to them. I don't know if that is appropriate request, but there needs to be one lead agency, is my opinion.
Thank you. Any comments or questions?
Was it AQMD that saw this, and is spike the correct word for hexavalent chrome?
Was the word they called it. And so looking at their MATES for 2015, they have 10 monitors up throughout their region. For hexavalent chromium, the average is 0.05 nanograms. The level at, right in front of Carlton Forge is 0.40 nanograms, 8 times the average. And at the school site, Lincoln School, the average is, the level is 0.16, 3 times the average. So basically, both of those sites are higher than any of their 5 monitors anywhere in Southern California. Now, they may have private monitors up in other places that have higher levels, but as far as MATES, it's exceeding all of that. So if that's exceeding, that hexavalent chromium is coming back down to the ground and needs to be cleaned up. 2 years ago, I brought 525 signatures to Barbara Lee from the community that was scared to death to sign the petition, but signed it anyway. They're afraid to lose their job with the city. They're afraid to lose their job with the company. They're afraid of everything. Many of the undocumented people are afraid they're going to be deported. They're afraid. There's just too much fear. And so this is another concern that makes it difficult for these low-income communities to be able to have their rights respected. So if you go into, Porter Ranch, these people have already been evacuated. Cyrus Reagan has already evacuated them at huge cost to the company. He hasn't shown up or mentioned or said one word for 6 years about Carlton Forge or about the situation in Paramount that he was informed 6 years ago in writing. He did a health investigation, which was just to send a questionnaire to the teachers at the school, and didn't check with the children, didn't expand it, ignored any requests from me, and that was the end of it. So, I guess maybe there needs to be an agency or a group created that assigns primary responsibility for each case to one particular agency. Okay?
One quick.
But not necessarily DTSC. It could be other agencies for different companies.
Yeah, do you know the LA County Coopers and LA County Fire? Do you know if they have been made aware of this or involved in this?
LA County who?
The LA County Fire. Let's just
The fire. I'm sure they have. I don't know, but the district attorney's office has been involved, and at first they were investigating Paramount Petroleum, wondering whether all the illness was related to that. So in 2011, they did a sting operation, the Water Board, the DTSC, AQMD, all of them together. They found a lot of violations at Paramount Petroleum, and then nothing more was ever done about it. And then, so that's just another example, another company, and then they get to slip under the radar. And so, and the illness could be like a cumulative effect from all these different companies and others that I haven't even named, that I don't even know about. There seems to be no limit on the amount of companies a small city of 55,000 people can have, and that's another issue. I guess not an issue for DTSC, but should be an issue for someone, because when a city gets to decide their zoning and they have no laws requiring them to limit it. Right now, Paramount has 4 forging companies and 55,000 people. There's only 22 forging companies in the whole entire South Coast Air Quality Management District's area, which exceeds beyond Southern California. And there's only 22. 4 of them are in Paramount. 3 of them are within a half a mile of each other, and there's 2 elementary schools right there. One of the elementary schools is 0.1 mile away. 2 of them are forging in the open air. I know this isn't a DTSC issue, but maybe it is, because they're forging in the open air. These toxins are coming down, and nothing is being done. So it's a big issue. I don't know what the answer is, but I'm just here to tell you that I'm concerned, and more people are becoming concerned than me. The union's becoming concerned, the teachers are getting scared and becoming concerned, and some of the residents are. Their fear of illness is starting to exceed their former fears. So I hope that you can take these information back and maybe help make some kind of positive change.
Can I get your contact information, please?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lappin. Thank you. And note, colleagues, that in the report that we got from the DTSC today, page 9 and 8, 9, have to do with this Carlton Forge site, which we haven't heard a lot about. Otherwise, it does indicate a draft human health risk assessment should be submitted to DTSC in October 2016 related to elevated concentrations of lead that were found in 2014 and 2015. Again, the challenge for this department and for our new Deputy Director of Site Mitigation and for Mr. Pang sitting up there is that when these things come out, people have to have confidence that this department is adequately evaluating these documents and have faith in you that when you communicate what the documents say, you're telling the truth and you're doing it in an authoritative way that inspires confidence and trust. Because hearing from our friends in Ag Park today, there is still a gap in that area with this department, and that's what you're trying to accomplish, and that's the goal that you need to set for yourselves. Next, Hugo Lujan from East Yard. This?
Hi. Good evening. My name is Hugo Lujan. I'm a community organizer with East Yard Communities for Environmental Justice. I was really involved with the outreach efforts to register folks for soil testing in East LA, Dow Gardens, and the City of Commerce. So I'm coming in with that perspective, also very involved in developing a lot of the, supporting in the development in a lot of the sheets that were sent out and public information that was sent out to the community. So I think in terms of the purpose of this meeting, I was thinking about what would be an ideal public relations person, right? So I think there were some of the points that already had been made. Somebody who is familiar with the local community, somebody who is bilingual, somebody who has experience in facilitating meetings and facilitating some sort of leadership development for the community to understand how this works. So I took that information and met with our members, because our members were also very involved in advising and how we move forward with the XI testing process. And I asked them, what are some critiques? So I'm going to read out what they came up with. So I think that'll provide a certain perspective on what the community has on DTSE, and then I can comment on some of the issues that I think, as a person that was collaborating in the process, some of the challenges that I noticed. But in terms of community members, there was the first one, I think, which I think summarizes everything. There wasn't any common sense, and that was in relation in the way that the agency spoke with community or send out mailers to the community. One clear example of that was sending out results of soil testing in just English and in ways that regular community members couldn't understand. So I think that was one clear example of why they used no common sense. No clear communication, no deadlines or commitment to those deadlines. There were several times in the process where as community members, we kept on asking, well, when will soil testing happen? By when will they receive a call? By when? What does this timeline look like? And that wasn't communicated, or when it was communicated, it wasn't something that the agency necessarily kept itself accountable to. One clear example of environmental racism, comparing it to Porter Ranch, I think that was one of the things that kept on coming up for our youth members. People aren't sent timelines, as well as there were residents in their homes who signed up for soil testing, and they were looking at us to answer questions for them, because they didn't feel comfortable enough contacting the agency or feel like they were going to be giving a response as to when the next steps for the cleanup will happen. And no sense of urgency in testing or identifying funding. The youth members that we organized within Bell Gardens High School mobilized to Sacramento to demand funding because they felt that the agency wasn't moving fast enough for it, right? So I think these were comments from specifically our youth members that were very heavily involved with the process. So I think that kind of gives a glimpse into what has been going on with community perspective on the agency. I think in terms of person as an organizer that was facilitating that process, I think what I noticed is that new staff members came in from DTSE who had their heart and their mind set in the right place. And the way that they engaged with community was very genuine and was very honest. But I think the moment that I saw that trust break was when there wasn't a direct commitment from DTSE as an agency to support the local representatives that we engage with on a day-to-day basis. And one of those examples was there was a conversation about renters. There was a process for renters to submit their requests to get their soil tested, and we had been assuming for several months that was the process, that was a permitted process. But then there was a conversation that we were having over the phone in one of these meetings, and one of the legal representatives mentioned that that's still unclear. When we had already gone maybe about a year collecting access agreements under the assumption that renters were going to get contacted for soil testing. So I noticed that in the conversation, it wasn't necessarily this local representative's fault or Caesar's fault or Susan's fault. It was because they themselves didn't have the information. So there was something going on with DTSE as an agency not providing the information that the local representatives need in order to do their work in a confident and in a sincere and genuine way, in order to rebuild the trust with the agency. Another
quick question on that topic, if
yeah.
that's okay. So we've heard that a lot the last few days, where folks are hesitant who work for the department to answer questions, and so people are concerned it's like a black hole.
Right.
And so the question was, why is that? Is that because these folks don't know the answer to the question? Is it because they don't have authority? And I think that's sort of what you just discussed here, which is maybe folks said certain things, but maybe they didn't quite have the authority for that yet. So maybe you can see why they don't want to answer the questions because they don't know the answer because they're worried that if they give an answer, someone's going to reverse them if they haven't talked to legal.
Right.
So it's a big agency. These are complicated questions. How do you think is the best way for the department to balance that?
I think the way that we managed to build some sort of trust through that process was this consistent communication with somebody who was also consistent in their position, right? For me, that person became Ana and Cesar and Susan. Those were the folks that I went directly to ask these questions. With this specific
example. Are those still the people you go to?
At this point, no, because we actually, and I'll talk about why we kind of stepped back. Well, it's very related to why this happened.
Please continue then. Yeah.
But yes, the reason we stepped back was specifically because of these situations when we were, as a community organization, we stepped up in facilitating the door-to-door engagement and supporting with that process. But if Cesar and Susan don't have the information, that means that we don't have the information. And that means that when community members come and ask us questions, it puts the organization in a very difficult position where we're the ones engaging them face to face. So I kind of felt like, oh, this is what Cesar feels like when a community member comes up to him and asks him a question when the agency hasn't really answered it yet, right? So for me, and that goes into the conversation of how do we develop partnerships with community organizations and DTSC, and how do we maintain them? So if there isn't a real commitment from DTSC as an agency to facilitate that process, then that's not going to be an effective partnership as an organization. So that's why we chose to remove ourselves from that position. So now we're still encouraging folks to register, but not necessarily facilitating or being the face of that process because we don't feel confident enough to be able to answer all the questions that need to be answered in the way they need to be. Okay.
The Vice Chair, do you want to answer it now?
But kind of
Yes.
a follow-up to that, I think in many cases, these things are very, very fact-specific that has to be applied to the law. And when I was in this, quite frankly, I tell people, I think this is what it is, but I'm not sure.
Right, yeah.
I need to go back and look and review and maybe get legal advice and other things. I'm not sure DTSC staff are authorized to do that. But if they were, would that be at least a satisfactory response to, I mean, would that be helpful?
If they were...
To say, this is what I think, but I'm not sure. We need to verify a few things, or I won't know until we verify these things. Would those kind of responses be valuable, or no?
I mean, I think for me as an organizer, I wouldn't put out any information unless we know that that's a concrete answer. So I think when it comes to us engaging with representatives, it's different than engaging with communities, right? So when I have a weekly meeting with Cesar or Susan, it was to hash out those details before I go out and engage with community. So what that means to me is I think it goes back to this conversation about there's a different set of culture within DTSC where I think community engagement isn't really given the priority or the respect that it deserves within the process. So I think if that was set in place, then there would be a certain sense of security from the representatives to pass on information and feel like that is the correct information. I think that the example about renters access agreements is a clear example because we had already been going through an entire at least 7 months of registering people under that assumption. And that was brought up at several meetings with DTSC staff present. So we were all going through that assumption, but then something happened along the way where communication wasn't really established. Another example was when we sent access agreements up to Sacramento to get registered, a lot of the residents were getting callbacks for months. So then we called and we asked, well, why aren't folks getting a callback? And the response was, I actually spoke to Susan, and then the response was, they placed a halt on responding to the access agreements. And that was the first time that the local representatives found out about it months after it had started, right? So there's a lack of communication between DTSC as an agency to these local representatives who are in charge of engaging in this process with community. So that's what I think we mean by there's a different culture that I think isn't really prioritizing community engagement in the way that it needs to be.
Hugo, are you part of the advisory committee?
No, Mark Lopez. So my role is to basically mobilize folks to advisory community meetings and also keep them updated on what's going on.
Do you think if there is a set monthly meeting where you have DTSC personnel as well as yourselves kind of get together and you have a list of questions, these are what the public are concerned about, can we please get answers to this, and then like next meeting make sure you get answers to that so you can communicate to the public?
Right. Yeah, no, I think
that would work?
Yeah, no, I think
Isn't that what's happening now?
Yeah, that's kind of like what's happening now, and I think that's the thing, is that some of the answers get some of the questions get answered, but then the answer to it switches months after, right? So with this access agreement is an example of that. It's like we got an answer, and the answer was yes, you can register and get soil testing for renters. And
so it's a moving target, kind of.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think it's lack of communication within that aspect of it, right?
And maybe just changing of policy to some degree, but that needs to be communicated directly. And that's why I'm thinking if you have like set meetings, we have monthly meetings, for instance, and if you have meetings like that and just coordinate it in such a manner that it's well organized, that some of these issues that you're having are addressed, and if there's any change in policy, that is actually communicated directly to you so you can take that to the
Yes,
impacted public.
Sorry. Oh, also, I think it's something that had already been mentioned, but in terms of interagency, working within agencies and also working with LA County, I think there was a conflict between LA County and DTSC in terms of doing the soil testing that I think was very, and has been very detrimental to slowing down the process, because I think there were also times when similar homes or the same homes were being tested by both DTSC and LA County, and that's, for us, it's a complete waste of time, especially when we're engaging with community members and they're talking about what's going on in the neighborhood. The workforce development was a huge, huge step in building accountability. It was because it started with asking community members about in what ways they would want to see themselves be part of the process. And some of them said, well, I want to learn how to do soil testing. And what that meant for us as a community organizer and as a community was, if somebody gets trained in how this process works, you can easily walk outside your house and take a look at what's going on in the neighbor's house that's getting tested and report back to the community, right? So those were the eyes and ears of the community, as well as building capacity within the community to actually move forward with that. So the workforce development was a huge plus. I encourage that to be implemented a lot more. I think it's a very positive aspect. And the idea about the pods, that's huge, because I think seeing similar faces, seeing folks that we are familiar with is going to build trust within the community and moving forward.
What does pods mean to you?
Pods in terms of a group of folks that would be for example, I was just talking to, I think, one of the representatives that is working for that's going to be focusing on Maywood, right? So this person is familiar with Maywood, would be in charge of communicating within the city of Maywood and coordinating and outreaching to the schools and different centers and doing door knocking. So having individuals coming from each neighborhood and bringing them close and speaking to each other in terms of what's going on in the neighborhoods and moving forward like that, I think would be very, very efficient.
How is that different than the past? I don't understand.
I think we've had Susan, who I think has been in charge of several different areas. I think if we have one staff member focusing on the neighborhood itself, I think would be very positive. Because I think for me, I was organizing in East LA, Commerce, and Bell Gardens, and that was a lot of work just to mainly organize within Commerce, and Commerce is just a very small city, so that's a lot of work.
Thank you.
For somebody to do that. Yeah. Okay, and then pardon
me a second.
That is it. I think that should be all that I have.
Any additional questions for Mr. Lujan? So thank you very much for all you're doing. You probably have the hardest job of anybody in this room.
Good comments. Appreciate it.
Diane Hughes. Hello.
I wasn't planning on speaking this evening, but after looking in the audience, I don't see any residents that are here to speak on their behalves. I have lived in the City of Commerce for 60 years. This has been my home. I first found out about my property's contamination on April the 28th in this very room. I cannot express the anger that I felt when I found out of the potential contamination of my property. I was angry to find out that it was a government agency that allowed this contamination to occur by allowing this temporary permit for several years. It angered me because my father was a Marine. He fought for his rights, for everyone's rights, and for his property to be contaminated along with other people just upset me to no end. I look out in the audience this evening and I see all these agencies and all these people representing their agencies. I think the frustration with the residents have been that they have attended these meetings, but the way that they have been treated has just turned them off. They're trying to raise families. It's hard to raise families and come to these meetings and feed your family, make sure your family is doing their homework, all the things that occurs in daily life. We have gone through a change in this community. This has changed our community. It has changed the way that my day-to-day life goes on. I'm not able to go into my garden the way that I was. I was handling this soil. I was planting plants. I was keeping up my property. I dug out my grass. I put new grass in. I did this myself until I found out that my property had the potential to be contaminated. It is very frustrating to know that the same agency that is responsible for this is also responsible for the cleanup and is also responsible for spending the $177 million that the governor has allocated towards this cleanup. We all know that this $177 million is not going to clean us all up. I mean, it's just impossible. The frustration that I have is that the community has come forward. They have expressed their concerns. The unfortunate part of this is that we never get consistent answers, just like the gentleman that just spoke before me. Everything changed. When we were originally found out about this contamination, we were told that we would be checked, our properties would be checked immediately. Then we were told it would be several months before someone could come and check. Then we found out that they would come and check our property. We were originally told that somebody would call us within days if our contamination levels were exceedingly high. Then that changed to, oh no, you're not going to get a call. You'll just get a letter. You'll get a letter in 6 weeks. The 6 weeks went on to 3 months. Every bit of information that we've gotten along the line has all changed. None of it has been consistent. None of it has stayed the same. On that April 28th meeting, Barbara Lee was sitting right here. She had so many residents in line in this aisleway here to ask questions. It was very frustrating to see how these questions were being answered. I don't care what the question was, they were getting the same answer. We were granted $177 million from the governor. We don't know how far that's going to take us. Can't answer that question. It was consistent with every question that came into play. Even one of our council persons came, she took the podium and she stated that one of our parks had been checked twice and they still hadn't had results. She wasn't able to obtain an answer that evening as well. There's something about these government or these types of meetings that we have. It's always the government agencies and so forth, just like this evening, that get to speak first, and the residents are always put at the end of this line. it's very hard, as I say, when you're trying to raise a family, to stay here for these meetings until 8, 9 o'clock in the evenings and know what your children are doing. And that's another frustration that we have, that we're always left for the end, that it's always the agencies and people that come from other areas that get to speak before us, although it's our lives that are being impacted on a daily basis. One of my recommendations that I think would be beneficial is to also have, once the results come in, to have somebody readily available for each of these areas to make appointments with residents to sit down and explain what this report is about. I got my report, and I had to call Caesar. Caesar was the one who kind of tried to break it down for me, but I still wasn't comfortable because, number one, it was over the phone, and I still had additional questions. So I think that would be a great recommendation. And not just anybody. I mean, somebody who is knowledgeable, somebody who is respectful, and somebody that the community could trust and feel like they have some sort of faith in them.
He has a question. Vice Chair?
Well, just to restate, to make sure I understand, you're recommending that that an appropriately skilled person be able to help community members to interpret the reports they're sent.
Exactly, because I got my report and it was quite complicated. I mean, unless you're a scientist, I mean, you have no idea what all these numbers are.
So is that
I just got my report probably within the last I'd say about 2 weeks. It's been about 2 weeks now. As soon as I found out, I went to my congresswoman's office to get educated on this whole process because this was new to me. And I spoke with her representative, Talia, and that's where I met Caesar. But again, lack of communication. I happened to invite one of my coworkers to the meeting. She attended with me only to find out that she too was within that 1.7 mile radius in Maywood. So she too became educated along with me, and we've kind of been guiding each other. Information she gets, she shares with me and vice versa. But I mean, this is the way that people are finding out, is through word of mouth, not because they've been contacted by the mail or by any, door-to-door announcements of any sort. It's been, through word of mouth. At that same meeting, I happened to give my cousin's address, who lives in Boyle Heights. She turned out to be within the 1.7 mile radius. So that's 3 of us now that are trying to help each other through this process. And it's strange because we don't all get the same information, and we're sitting here trying to figure out, what's reality and what's not. And it's very frustrating. The most frustrating part is not to be able to enjoy your home, to think that you're sitting in something toxic. It is so upsetting. I can't even tell you on so many levels. I have been doing home improvements to make my house better than what I think it is now. And I do it with a lot of pride because it's the family residence. It's where our family was raised, and it's important to me to carry on the family and have that home held up to a certain standard. And it's very frustrating to put time, money, blood, sweat, and tears into something that you don't even know if you're going to get back now. And it's money that's already been invested. It's not like I can go back and take crown molding out. It's not like I can, remove the things that I've put into the home already. We also had another meeting where there was a court reporter that sat there. She was documenting all the community's questions, just like you are asking all the questions this evening. There were so many people that came to the podium that had so many issues regarding their property, values on their property. Does that mean my value is going to drop? Not only that, but, I inherited property. That was one of the other questions. Can I sell it? Do I have to hold on to it? I mean, this is all financial things that affect all of us in different ways. All of this was documented. I've yet to see one thing, one piece of paper that answers one of those questions. Now, I understand there's supposed to be a meeting held. I'm not sure if it's going to be here at City of Commerce next month. And I understand that meeting, they're supposed to have a representative from the county assessor's office to address property values and what you have to do if you want to put your property up for sale. Now we have this other problem. If we want to sell our property, if we want to rent our property, we have to disclose that our property is contaminated. So how fun is that? I mean, on top of everything else, on something we're not even responsible for. We go to work every day, you know, and what do we work for if it's not our homes? I mean, our home is our number one value that we have, and we no longer have that.
Do you believe that your home is one of the ones that's going to need to be cleaned up?
I was told by Caesar that mine would not because it was considered minimal. So now, what does that mean? It was almost like I didn't know what to wish for, because I thought at least if I was, highly contaminated, I knew I would be cleaned up, and I'd have some documentation to at least show that if I sold the property or I rented it, that I had some documentation saying at least I was cleaned up. Now I don't have that, because now they're telling me my contamination is so minimal. But now my concern is, I don't know what my neighbors' results are on both sides of me. How do I know that their property is much worse than mine that's going to seep into my property? I have no way of knowing that. I mean, can you put yourself in that position when you go home every night to be in a home that you love, that you've taken care of, that you were raised in, and not feel comfortable in your own home after a hard day's work? I mean, think of what that feels like, or what that would be like.
It's very difficult for anyone to be in your shoes. How long was it between the time that your property was sampled and when you learned the results?
This is the frustrating part. Again, I was told it was going to be a very minimal amount. It turned out to be 3 months between the time I was tested. I was tested the day after Memorial Day holiday, that Tuesday, and I just got the results 2 weeks ago. And probably the only reason I got the results when I did was because luckily I made that connection with Caesar at Congresswoman Royball's office. And thank God for him, because he's been my go-to anytime I've had a question, and he's been very good about communication.
So you're talking about Caesar at the Roybal Howard's office, not Caesar at the DTSC?
DTSC is Caesar, the Caesar I'm talking about, along with Talia, who is a representative of Congresswoman Roybal Allard's office. Those two have been my go-to people, and they've been very instrumental in assisting me with any of the questions and concerns that I have. But again,
When we had 200 Caesars, maybe we would have enough.
Yeah, well, somebody, I understand somebody has to do this, but I mean, it's so upsetting. I mean, I've been like this since I found out in April. And the other question I had was, I found out that City of Commerce supposedly was found out that they had the potential for contamination in September. And I barely found out in April. So you tell me how good that communication is. There's no reason for the residents to have that big of a gap. Now, Boyle Heights obviously was identified several years ago. They've already filed their class action suit. Okay? And again, the father, I mean, I even went to go see Father John to get information in terms of this contamination and how they went about. He explained, just like he did this evening, the process that he was involved with, where they get the burners and they heat it up and they do this whole process. I was home when they took my soil samples. There was no burners or anything. All they did when they were testing my soil samples were basically put them in plastic bags and labeled them, and then took them. There were no burners.
How did that process go with the sampling? Were you notified in the mail? Did they come speak to you door to door? Phone?
Again, I submitted at that meeting where I met Caesar at Councilwoman Congresswoman Royball's office, I took that form, the agreement form for testing, the approval form, whatever you want to call that form. I signed it off and I handed it to Caesar at that point. And I was contacted probably, I'd say, it was probably about a month from that point on for my scheduling.
That
for
by
my
phone?
soil. Excuse me?
That was by phone? The contact?
The contact was by phone. Yes, it was.
So they called you
Yes.
to do what?
To schedule an appointment. And they told me that I didn't have to be home for the samples to be taken.
And how long was it till they came out and did the samples? That was in May. Was that it?
It was the day after Memorial Day holiday. It was that Tuesday.
And how long was that between the initial contact?
I would say that was probably about 3 weeks, something like that, because I barely found out April the 28th. So
Did you have contact with DTSC between the time they took the samples and the time that you found out the results?
No, none. Everything.
You're getting anything in the mail?
I still haven't gotten anything in the mail.
Not one thing.
Not one thing.
You
Caesar.
got the results in the mail.
No, Caesar was the one who obtained my results, and he emailed them to me, and I printed them off of my email. And I have, I collected them and I put them in a folder. But again, I need somebody to sit down with me to explain exactly what it is that I have. Caesar tells me, well, on the scale, you're way below, so you don't have anything to worry about. But I'd like to understand it a little bit more than that. And that's why I say I think it would be beneficial to have somebody available to all these areas to start booking appointments once these results start to come in. I guess I'm done. I just want you to know the frustration levels that this has been for all of us. And I think the way that all these meetings have been handled has discouraged the residents from coming forward, as you can see. I mean, why wouldn't there be more residents here, number one, if they had been notified, and number two, if they were happy with the way that things were going? I mean, that's a clear picture of what's happening when you don't have anybody but your agencies in your audience. I mean, that should be your number one wake-up call, that something is wrong. Because you can't tell me that if people know that they have contamination in their properties, that they're not going to make arrangements to be here on something that's so important to all of us. And I'm sorry, but I think we do have a right to know who's at the bottom of this stockpile that's caused all this. I don't even know what to call it. This terrible, terrible thing that has happened. I think we have a right to know who it is. And this idea that, we make deals and, that's okay. We're not going to press charges. We're just going to move on and try and clean this up and let us deal with it, I think stinks. I mean, somebody is responsible somewhere for this. And if you don't, if nobody wants to tell us, okay, then at least help us through this process in a better way. One last comment. When you do have residents and they come forward, have somebody who is going to be genuine in answering the questions, or at least trying to get the answers to the questions. The people that we reach out to that conduct these meetings, I mean, it's apparent when you come to these meetings that they're not here to really help you get anywhere. And this is another reason why you have the audience that you have. It's sad. And that's why I decided to speak tonight, because you're an independent agency. Hopefully, you can do something about this. And I thank you for your time, and I really hope that tonight when you go home and you open your homes, you think of me and think, what must this community go through every day, entering and not knowing what they're entering into? Going home and turning on your faucets and wondering if this contamination has seeped into your pipes that the water that you're bathing with is okay. You go home tonight, all of you, and try that and see how you feel. Thank you.
Additional questions? Thank you very much, Ms. Hughes. Tim Chauvet?
This is who?
Hey, that's Tim Chauvel.
Chauvel, sorry. It's a long night.
I'm a public participation specialist with the Department of Toxic Substances Control. I came here tonight on my own time. I took a couple of hours off, so I'm here as a private resident of Los Angeles County. I'll be quick. I know you must be pretty worn out. I started working at DTSC in 2000 as a public outreach specialist. Originally in the 1980s, I was in Greenpeace, worked in New Zealand, Australia, South Pacific. Then I went on to get a master's degree in environmental science and engineering and communication. And then I ended up working on the Headwaters Forest up in Northern California, developing a communications plan for the community and the issue up there, and that became my master's degree thesis. I came to DTSC thinking the public outreach position sounds pretty good. The job description, but as I got into the program, I mean, I worked on the Santa Susana Field Lab, I worked on Exide, I worked from Vandenberg Air Force Base, all the military sites down to San Diego. I do a lot of little projects in between. And I think what I see that's missing with this panel is that you're not really hearing from the staff at the staff level. So you've got the management coming in and giving their outline, but you're not really hearing from people in the working actually in the department and the coalface. So, and I wanted people here to, you know, there's a lot of talk about public participation specialists, and there's been some really good people that have come through the department. There's a lot of people that have left. I've got a lot of institutional knowledge, but the problem is the position for public participation specialists is that we have a lot of responsibility but no authority. Every day I have to document every 15 minutes of my time through the daily log. I have 20 hours a month that I can use for doing the daily log or other internal tasks. So at any point in time, I know a lot of the specialists have at least 20 projects going at a time. That means some of the projects you could be dealing with, I've worked with over 100 people in a week, from the community to internal staff to consultants, the responsible party. So it's completely multitasking all the time. And I think there's a perception that, you know, we're not doing our job, but the problem is that we don't really have the resources to do it adequately. And I think the position was a really good idea for the state, but I think the institution didn't come with it to support the position. And what I see on some of these larger projects is there's a lack of strategic planning around communications. I tried to develop a communications plan for Exide before the project was closed, and I wasn't able to get internal buy-off to do so. Same with Santa Susana. I surveyed 100,000 houses, and I got 4,000 responses. I put that into a document that was then going to be part of a public outreach plan, and then I got taken off the project. There's a lot of politics in the department, and also the department has a culture there's a culture of fear for staff, because if you step out of line, then you can be things can happen to you. And I think more of the staff would get up and talk about their experiences, but they're fearful of doing so. So
You're aware that the director wasn't enthusiastic about the panel visiting the branch offices?
wasn't?
Right, you're aware of that, right?
No. But some years ago, I did request to one of the directors, why don't we have a 360 review process within the department? Because the problem is my management can review my performance. I cannot review theirs. And we have performance evaluations. The last performance evaluation I had was 2014. I'm supposed to have one every year. And quite really, they're kind of like a waste of time, because I will get judged on my performance, but then I also have to say, okay, I want these trainings. So I want to do these certain types of communications trainings, facilitation training, conflict resolution training, and there's no money. So I have gone through all those trainings, but all the new staff coming in, they are not getting that training. So there's fundamental issues around the communications program, which I think can be fixed. There's some good people working in it. But decisions through the department, and it's like being in the military, it goes through a chain of command. And I've seen over the years that branch chiefs will control the communication process out to the public. Certain things will be given to the public, other information is withheld. And I suppose that's how government works. I don't know. I've never worked in government before. I worked in non-profits and consulting. But anyway, I wanted to get up and just, say something to the community that there are people in the department that do care about the protection of public health and the environment. And there's some very good staff, but I feel that they are kept back from really excelling in their ability to do their work.
Any questions for Mr. Chauvel?
Do you feel that, I know that presently there is a move to change the feeling that staff has that their thoughts doesn't really matter, that there is really no way for them to, in some ways, provide reviews for their supervisors. I know that there's a movement to basically have this survey of all the individuals at the TSC. So I think it's imperative that when you receive that survey, that you're completely honest. We hope that there will be changes. I think it would be very imperative that there are changes, because if the staff do feel that they're basically they don't matter, it's going to reflect on how they do their job and what they can achieve. And so I think that there is a movement to try to change that feeling by providing this survey, really determining what may be the feelings of the staff. And I think that it's very important that you be completely candid and completely honest about your views, and that we have all of the staff at DTSC really be honest.
I think if you do that, you need to institutionalize it so it's on a yearly basis.
Yeah. Yes.
Because it's all about making good decisions. The department needs to make good decisions. If you look in the past, there's a lot of decisions that have languished or haven't, I don't know, were they the right decision? And, we've got a lot of projects we've got a lot of commingling of chemicals in groundwater. Things have been left for a long time.
Yeah. We just ran a survey just recently, and that's going to be shared at our next meeting. But that was a small cohort. But there is, the department is actually running a larger survey to really determine what's the feelings of staff and other stakeholders.
I think if you can find any way to elevate the internal communication.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of trainings, but personalysis and different. The last one we had was Crucial Conversations. But the thing and so there's a whole book, and we all went through Crucial Conversations, but the thing was, management had their crucial conversations and staff had theirs, and there's no conversation going on in the middle.
Okay.
So we're pretty much siloed.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Chauvel, we really appreciate you coming. We know that you've corresponded with us and give us some other thoughts on your perspective on public participation from being inside the department, and appreciate your courage and your willingness to speak with us. We want to encourage other folks following the guidelines that have been set to reach out to us. Got a feeling that when you get that survey, I'm not worried that you're going to be honest on that survey. You mentioned that the department has to make good decisions. And fundamentally, that's really what this panel is all about. This panel can't make the decisions for the department. It's not our role. The panel is short-lived. So the challenge for the panel is to figure out, with the recommendations that we write in paper, some of which the department is going to be pressured to implement, some maybe the legislature picks up. There's theoretically some transparency from this, but in the end, how does that really on the ground translate into good decisions? And there's a real concern among the public that it doesn't, that nothing this panel really does in the year and 2 months that it has left or whatever is going to translate into good decisions. That being said, we're trying to put forth recommendations that we hope in the end, in time, in next year, 2 years, 3 years down the road, do lead to sounder decision making. But it's a challenge. So do you have any, I know you've given us some stuff in writing, but how do you think what this panel can do can translate into better decision making by the employees that have to make the decisions of this agency?
Well, I think, well, first of all, we've got to acknowledge that we're in a low trust environment. And for the panel to make lasting change, even if a board wasn't developed or whatever, I think you have to embed some institutional changes within the department that forever changes the communication. And I think there's other government agencies around the world that have good communication, internal communication and external communication processes. And I don't understand why DTSC solidified into the communication agency it is at this point in time. And I think it's a good move that public participation is being split from the media side, because I always had that issue with Jim Markson that everything was sound bites, and to me, my training is about you have to build trust with the community. But that said, you can build trust with the community, but they still might not like the end decision. And the problem with public outreach is that it's expensive. So if a community wants more outreach to be undertaken for their specific issue, who's going to pay for it? And that's the problem we have, is that we have responsible parties that don't want to pay for extra outreach, and legally they're not required to do so. So the manual follows the laws, and we have this cookie cutter process where we follow the law, and anything else other than that, I have to justify my time. So there's limitations to what I can actually achieve.
So how does that help this panel make lasting change to make good decisions?
I don't know.
That is the wrong way to end this meeting.
Well, I can always come back and have another conversation.
I mean, you're exactly right, though. You're a regulatory agency, and your job is to implement the laws and regulations, implement and enforce. That's your job. You can't go making up your own regulations and laws and say, well, I think this is a good idea, or I think we do this. So I think your answer was good. I mean, that's exactly right. It's just like, when you talk about a football team or whatever, the line has to do this, but you just concentrate on doing your job and doing as best you can, makes the best team you can.
And I think the issue was, originally I came from the activist background. And the activist background is, we want to fix this issue. But now I'm a civil servant and 16 years in, and, I'm in a system, a box, you name it, and I can't deviate unless I'm given permission to do so, or there is resources, because this is also political, and So I think the community has justifiable concerns because it's public health and the environment. But I think the problem is we're limited by the laws and policies.
That's for sure. Any other questions?
No.
Anyway, thank you for your time.
Do appreciate your time, Mr.
Yeah,
Sheldon.
I agree. Appreciate it.
Yes.
Any additional public comment at this time? Okay, we're going to close that item 6. I want to thank everyone for participating with us tonight. Our panel is going to be meeting October 14th to deliberate on some of these recommendations, and we've got a report due at the end of October, as Larry indicated in the initial discussions. So, panelists, just a time check. It's 9 o'clock, or just a little bit before, so we're probably going to finish a little bit early today. What I would like to do is open up item 9, please. This is IRP reporting requirements, discussion, and possible action concerning public outreach program and other recommendations for IRP written reports due under Health and Safety Code Section 57014D, F, and H. And what we had talked about earlier today in Jurupa Valley is we had forwarded certain topics, recommendations, and asked that Dr. Campbell and Mr. Rolfes work on those and put some of that stuff forward in draft form, work it up a little bit so that the panel can deliberate on it in October. And that sounds like a sound approach. However, I do think there are some things that we've learned over the last 2 or 3 days that could be useful as we think about the narrative for the discussion on public participation. And rather than jam all those in October and recognizing that we are not going to be able in between the meetings to give you ideas because of the Bagley-Keene Act, I would like to just mention a couple of the themes that I've heard. Dr. Campbell and Mr. Rolfes can figure out whether and how to integrate those into the narrative section of the report. But I don't think it will take that long. But if each of us could just express a few of our observations and things that might be helpful, for example, the pod concept or other things that we think might be helpful, I think that will make the report writing a little bit easier and will help Mr. Rolfes in terms of themes. So unless there's an objection, I would like to do that. Each panelist can take a few minutes or not and just run through a couple things that you'd like Mr. Rolfes and Dr. Campbell to consider as they write the report. Is that okay?
You might need to put a clock on me.
Okay. All right. We'll do that. Do you want to start?
Yes. I started thinking, about what we've learned, exactly what you said, really on the drive here. I was didn't have time last night, went right to sleep, and considering it. And one of the first things that popped into my mind was earlier today, I said, you didn't use SW 846 for this thing? And then it occurred, that's a brownfield we're talking about. SW 846 are test methodologies, sampling methodologies for hazardous waste. The complexity of all of these different things. And even then, it depends on what media you're testing and all that. There's different protocols and different things. And I can see where a lot of the community, even though they're giving good answers, seems like it'd be changing everything. It's confusing to me, who spent 20 years of my life working on it, to get it right. It's very fact specific. So that was the first thing that popped into my mind, where the confusion. But the big thing I was thinking about is, how can DTSC regain confidence or trust, whichever words you want to use. And I think the easiest, or the most effective, and with the shortest time frame, is a lot of what we're hearing with the pod concept is, have them, I can trust you. But if you're a big law firm and I get different lawyers every day and don't like it, I don't develop that relationship. And so that's why I was talking to Mark, what does this pod concept mean? Now, this goes back to my big concern, change of management at DTSC, change of directors, not enough resources. And one more thing I want to add that I came into is crisis management. And of course, a lack of resources and change of leadership leads to crisis management. But I'm digressing a little bit, so I want to go back to that. But I think if the community sees the same person again and again and develops a relationship with them, they can develop trust. And the pod, to me, is another way of saying a stable team. Now, I don't think DTSC currently has the resources in a variety of areas to do that. And I don't know about a dedicated person to each site. I think they could handle multiple, but the term, is how many. What's the right word?
That's what we put as one of our subjects in already there, is to have committed individuals for each of these really complex sites. I think it's one of our was something that we discussed today, is kind of having that, and I think it's similar to the pod. I think pod is an extension of that, just having some committed individuals for these complex sites.
Yeah, and to go two more, I want to go to the crisis management thing. If it's Mecca or if it's Exide or whatever, because of, let's say, a lack of resources that DTSC tends to, and necessarily so, because their bosses are politicians, ultimately, they react to the crisis on hand and divert their resources to varying degrees. And so I'm not sure, I'm still thinking about how to address that. But that is something I've seen consistently over the last 20 years. On the people said they're slow to get answers, I can remember the CUPAs, the Unified Program Agencies, would ask DTSC a technical question. We'd have a list of 10. We'd meet with them both locally 4 times a year and in Sacramento about the same. And some of those issues did not get answered. So they're very complicated.
I'm still a little confused. So what is it about crisis management that you are observing?
What it does is they're working, they shift the resources from from other facilities, like Paramount, like the Colton Forge, although that's not really their primary responsibility. That's a bad example. From Autumnwoods to Exide, and resources move in these other sites. The people say, well, I haven't heard from them in 6 months. That's probably due to the crisis management thing. Well, this is the emergency or cause du jour, and we need to divert our resources. And that's what I would do too if I was a boss.
So is the observation that you're making is that, to explain in our report, that we think that crisis management is partially a reason for some of these resource diversions, or do you have some idea on how they can better address crisis management?
At this point, I'm just throwing that out for thought and to do it. I'm not throwing out for thought. I think in our report, I'm confident that to have trust, they have to have try to reduce turnover and allow the community to see the same things.
Let me ask you a question, though, Mike. Do you feel that there should be maybe a crisis management team that is always available to address these changes without taking away personnel from other projects?
You might be onto the solution there. That's basically what is going on here is a crisis management team that got diverted from other jobs. But maybe those are low priority or whatever. I like your train of thought or where you're going with that. I'm just not exactly sure how it would work in DTSC.
Well, I think we agree that, and this is something we're going to discuss further, that there needs to be more resources, but maybe identify exactly what those resources, necessary resources may be. And some of the things that we've identified, I think you're exactly right, is this crisis mode that the department seems to get into, and then you kind of get diverted from some of the smaller.
I'm going to flip back to 30 years.
Yeah.
You always have in the military, you always have if you're a battalion, you always have a company in reserve. If you're a regiment, you always have a battalion in reserve. And and that is your crisis management.
I agree.
team.
Okay, let's just, so you told me to put a time clock on you, so you've got a few more minutes to run through these things. But I think,
That's a good point,
let's be
Bill.
honest, this
That's a very strong
Exide
point.
situation and adopting, dealing with it has been a tremendous challenge for the department. It would be for any department. And so it's appropriate, I think, to acknowledge that the department has had this huge challenge to deal with. And it's something that is worth acknowledging.
One more?
Sure.
And we haven't heard back, and I can't even remember whether it's Penny or Ingrid that suggested the string fellow, or I heard the advisory groups were working. To me, something like that that is a multi-agency group talking to the communities would be very beneficial. Instead of, although, and I like this, I like where DTSC is going with this. I've had some conversations with the director about, well, this is your responsibility. What you do, if we look at things through the lens of the community, that's not the right answer, that's not my job. Yeah. We need to have our people go out and find the right person and refer it or bring them in. But if you had them all at the table to talk to the community, I think it would even be more effective.
But may I mention something, Mike? We just heard that there is lack of internal communication. Now imagine external communication in between these groups. There's probably issues there as well.
Well, I think a lot of that is going to take some time to learn how to explain very complicated rules and regulations and laws and concepts, sampling protocols. A lot of science based in this stuff. To explain it clearly in common language, just like I bet I might be able to read their report on her home, but I might have to call DTSC myself and ask a couple of questions. And so that sort of thing, that's going to be an ongoing problem and just learning. But if you look at it through the lens of environmental justice or through the lens of the community, okay, how can we communicate with them that way? But I think
we did include risk communication as part of our recommendations and trying to get a handle on
it. It definitely is.
Anything further?
Those are my big points.
Okay. Dr. Campbell, do you want to go, or you're the one writing the report?
So I'm writing the report, so I'm going to put anything I think is appropriate.
Fine. I think we are fine with that. So I do want to make a few points. We did hear about the work group that was present at Santa Susana. Maybe that was similar to sort of this multi-agency thing at Stringfellow, and that morphed into a CAG, which hasn't had quite the success. I do think we need to understand what the difference is between these and try to figure out what the best practices are.
Agreed.
And we asked Larry to reach out to some of those other CAGs or to try to get a sense as to some of the best practices.
What makes them functional? What makes them dysfunctional?
We should acknowledge in the report what we've heard about the value of some of the recent hires at the department. This observation from folks that they're hiring people from the communities. And the Anna Mascarenases of the world, the Oscar Camposes of the world, I'm pretty sure is who they're referring to, and certainly others. But there's a perception that, or reality that makes for a better department. So I think we should acknowledge the efforts that the department, folks like Tony Cordero also, who understand some of these issues. I think we should acknowledge that we are hearing from folks that that's making a difference.
Yeah, and I think we should also acknowledge that the department is trying to have some surveys in place to really see what is the frame of mind of the staff. I know that it's something that has not been done in the past, but it is a work in progress, and I think we're going to hear about that in December, where there's going to be some preliminary results of that.
Yeah, so that's something we can wait on, but
I think we should reference that we are hearing that the department is perceived by some to be insular. I think that's a word that I'd like to see in our report, and it's a challenge that the new leadership has to overcome. We talked about this before. I think we're hearing from folks that having dedicated staff for certain of the most difficult and thorniest of sites is valuable.
Yeah. Say it again. I didn't catch that.
Having dedicated public participation staff, that topic, for the most thorny sites.
For a manageable number of sites.
Right.
Yeah.
I think we heard some really valuable things from Hugo Lujan, talking about the need to have bilingual folks in public participation. Exide is going to be a tremendous challenge for this agency, but it's a challenge, but it also is a real opportunity. It seems to be an opportunity to learn really state-of-the-art public participation practices. So it seems that we should acknowledge the tremendous challenge and crisis, or however we want to describe it, that Exide is posing for this agency, but also indicate that we expect the department to learn from this, and particularly with regard to public participation. This is an opportunity to learn best practices.
Well, I think Jane Williams said nothing like this has ever been done before in this skill. I don't know if that's true, but Jane's been around a while, and usually she's a pretty good source.
Another thing is, we did hear from Hugo and others, and we hear this a lot, is that the department has trouble sticking to its timelines. And that seems to be a topic that we hear every community, on this trip at least, and it is one of those things that undermines trust. So I'd like us to consider at least just that we are observing and hearing about the need for the department to set deadlines and stick to them, and that is a real good way to engender trust. On the other hand, it's a way to jeopardize trust when folks see those deadlines blown.
Maybe set realistic deadlines. I've always learned when a contractor, everybody tells me they're going to do something in 12 months, that means it's going to take 24. I'll automatically adjust.
Yeah, but I want to mention one thing, though, is sometimes there are unforeseen circumstances. For example, people who
sometimes
leave.
there are always unforeseen circumstances.
Exactly. And if you have 10 people and you're like, okay, it's going to take 12 months, but then all of a sudden 8 people leave and you only have 2 people, that's going to change the situation. But that needs to be communicated. Okay, we had allocated this much resources, now we have half of those resources, this is going to take longer, but you have to communicate that.
Well, in site remediation, some of these, we heard a lot of that recurring, is they got to stick with the contract and do this and that, and it's just like a contract for remodeling a house. You're going to find something unexpected in the process.
Yeah.
A couple other things, and then we can conclude. We have heard very positive things about the workforce development program at Exide. Obviously, that's still in the infancy, but I think as we're talking about best practices and things to learn from Exide, this seems to be something that the department can be proud of, and certainly seems to have gotten a good start. Worth acknowledging.
And can be mirrored maybe for other sites.
Well, that's the yeah.
Yeah.
Those are some of the observations that I had. The other thing I think is going to be necessary, panelists, and we do. I believe that our reporting requirements, do include our requests for information. Typically, our reports have data requests. Exide is $176 million. The department's entire budget for the year is just over 200. So it's basically more or less a duplicate of the department's entire budget. we are, maybe not this year, but early next year, if not this year, I think we do need another report from the department on what's going on with Exide. I think it's worthwhile for us to ask them to come and present to us on what's going on with that. As an independent review panel, we need to keep an eye on Exide. So I think we should consider in our next report, or whenever it might be, acknowledging that we need to hear about Exide, public participation, site mitigation, the whole soup to nuts. If we don't do that, we're not carrying forth what I think the legislature wants us to do.
Let me ask you another question, Gideon. Do you think that it would be a good idea to have a breakdown of where the funds is going to for transparency's sake?
Of course.
Yeah.
All that stuff, the money, the whole soup to nuts.
So
That's a huge thing,
yeah.
and I'm not sure they're quite there yet, and it's another thing to add to Zoe's long list. But we're the only game in town right now. Obviously, there's the legislature can call a hearing or two, but for us as a panel to be doing this without keeping an eye on Exide and being able to report to the legislature and the governor that we're looking at it and paying attention and asking for some transparency there, I don't think it's a decision we have to make tonight, and I'm not sure that we're ready yet in the remaining 3 months that we have, but shortly thereafter, I think it's worthwhile. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it would be, yes, I agree. Another thing I thought, though, with the department, I think almost everything I heard negative, we've heard that the department has embraced that and realized it and is looking at ways to fix it, or already has things in process, but you don't change a culture overnight. No. But we are, as you said, Gideon, we are seeing some positive comments on there is, in what we heard here, indications that things are changing to, that the community likes.
Yeah, also on that, I'm sorry to interrupt, but one thing I should also mention is this thing that was announced this week about splitting up, basically, for lack of a better word, PR from public participation. I think we should express that the panel is supportive of that and has heard more or less universal support for that.
Yeah.
So that's all that I had. But I think that can help sort of, you'll have to figure out how to organize this, but I think thematically, maybe this can help you a little bit.
I think that the best matrix for seeing how effective we are and how effective the department is looking at our survey result now with what the opinion of our small cohort is and seeing how that may change or remain the same as the year goes by.
And I think what we heard this morning was a little bit about, well, yeah, they need other positions more than public participation. They need more public participation. There's no question about that. Yeah. Because maybe at those sites they're doing fine, but we probably need to keep an eye on: are there enough permitting staff? Are there enough inspection staff? You know, I don't know how we do that reoccur, but we're talking about maybe when we get into the metrics and everything. What's the vacancy rate? How are you doing? You know, how's this? What, you know, are you meeting your inspections?
Yeah, those metrics I think are very important.
We did put one of the metrics. I forget if it was enforcement.
September 30th, we're asking for a report or something.
Well, that's next year, but I think one of the metrics we did have prior was asking about the report on vacancies and staff turnover, and it's worth maybe considering that for public participation.
Yeah, that's more of one of our objective measures. Remember how we were discussing early on, I think even in our December meeting, that we're going to have objective and subjective criteria. Objective criteria would be numbers of positions, for example, numbers of communications. And then more of the subjective one would be the state of mind of all the stakeholders, how satisfied they are.
Well, we talked about that today, and you're going to think about what the appropriate metrics might be to recommend. I think it's worthwhile to look at the past metrics we've had and see if those are any analogs to this particular program, and maybe think of your own. But we really appreciate you taking this on. Again, to emphasize, I think what Mike emphasized before, you know, we don't want a 50-page report on this. Somehow try to condense this down so people actually, you know, read it. It's very difficult, and I know we just spouted out here for 20 minutes, but less in theory could be more here. So that does mean you have to spend a lot of time with it.
I believe in brevity.
Anything further on this topic, item 9, or is there any public comment at this time? Okay. We'll close that up. That takes us to organizational, operational, and administrative matters. I don't think there's anything
No.
to discuss there that we haven't discussed already, is there?
No.
No.
Okay. Future meeting schedule and agenda items. Again, we have scheduled October 14th in Sacramento. I think it's going to be at Cal Center. We'll figure out what time that meeting starts. It might be one of those meetings that we want to start at 9 a.m. because it's going to be a day of deliberation, and those typically do take longer.
Yeah.
I agree.
We also should try to keep the other agenda items and presentations to a minimum that day.
Yes.
So this is the topic is future meeting schedule and agenda items. Is there any reports that we think we need from the department on this topic that we haven't already received?
No.
No. I would recommend for the agenda for the report, maybe even block 2 to 4 hours on discussion on the report.
Yeah.
That being said, that isn't the whole meeting. Is there something else that you want to schedule as an agenda item for that morning in particular? I think it would be on that topic. Is there anything else that we think we need?
Yeah, you know, I don't think we've seen the qualitative public outreach surveys that the department's currently doing. That might be a brief presentation. Yeah,
They may be still in process.
No. They've been doing them for
Oh, really?
a while. Yeah. They've been measuring all this stuff. They've been doing both quantitative and qualitative for a while. Now, how good are they? I know that the ones we used to do in mine, but they almost phrase to get us a 9 out of 10. But
Remember, Gideon and Mike, we have to discuss our own survey results next meeting. That might take some time.
Okay.
We'll need at least an hour for
Can you
that.
delegate to?
our own surveys. That's true. Yeah.
Can you delegate to Larry and me to figure out if we need the department to present on that topic, if they have enough to present, or whether they can just do that in writing? Can you delegate that to us to determine whether we should agendize that in the morning?
Delegate it to who?
Larry and me to figure that out?
Sure.
Okay.
Of course.
All right, so we'll do that. Otherwise, it's going to mostly be a focus on the report. Also, I know before everybody leaves, we have agendized November 16th in the Capitol to talk about our annual report. I would ask that the department staff that are in the room, if you can communicate that up the ladder. We don't want folks to be caught off guard with that. We're going to meet in the Capitol on November 16th to talk about our annual report. And we're going to invite legislative staff and the governor's office to participate in that and hopefully make that worthwhile effort.
Are we going to mention legislation too?
At the next meeting?
No, at the November meeting.
That'll be our annual report recommendations, so
Got it.
we'll have to
Okay.
figure out what goes in there, but that'll be the time to do it.
Okay.
Okay, anything further on item 11, future meeting schedule and agenda items? Okay, hearing none, we have no closed session, so we'll take a motion to adjourn. Is there a motion?
There's a motion.
There's a second.
Okay, any objection? I want to thank everyone for participating tonight and thank our staff, our council, and thank the City of Commerce for having us and all the members of the public and DTSC staff, community residents who came here tonight. And we'll be back. This meeting is adjourned.